Okay, so uh, good afternoon. Obviously, it's what 5 to 1 UK time. Obviously, it's going to be early hours in Australia and New Zealand now, and of course on the eastern seaboard of the US, it's what 7 o'clock in the morning. So if you're waking up in the US, welcome. Um, what I want to talk about to start off with is concussion in sport. We've seen a few incidents over the weekend in a variety of sports where concussion has been and headshots, especially in the NHL, the Six Nations, and the NRL, where head contact has been quite contentious. Now, obviously, in the England Ireland game, there was a red card. Second Ireland international, where the opposition have had a player sent off for a similar incident. So at least they're being consistent there. Excuse me one second. Got to have a cup of tea when you wake up. And consistency in refereeing. Now, I've watched the NRL this weekend. There's been some head contact. There's been some concussions. There's been a new interpretation of the rules brought in this season, where the independent doctor says you've got to come off the field. Um, and player welfare. And whenever I do videos on player welfare, they don't get a lot of views, which I find striking, considering all the research that's been done on concussions. I had 2 concussions in the summer, and I was actually quite ill for a while. And I'm still feeling some of the side effects now. There was about 2.5, 3 months where I was really not well. And it led me to have some time off work, contribute to other health issues, but it did impact things. And the incidents I saw on the NRL this weekend, the Victor Radley one, where they allowed him to play on for several minutes, and he got put on report for a dangerous tackle in that time, is striking because he led with his head. He knocked himself clean out. There was Thomas Williams for Wales um, in the first Six Nations game against France, where again led with the head. So it's poor tackle technique. So that's on the player, but he was in a seriously bad way. There was a couple in the Canterbury North Queensland game, which were quite serious. The Naden one looked bad, but the I think it was the Smith one where he passes the ball and he's hit, and it's a clean hit. The defending player has to make the challenge, but the way he falls, the way he's knocked out before he hits the ground, he's out cold. If either of those guys play next week, that'll be astonishing if their class is grade one. If their class is grade one under the new NRL interpretation of the rules that they brought in, they should not be playing for a couple of weeks. So yeah, there was a couple of the Ireland England incident with Yules. The Irish player goes off, doesn't return, and straight red. So whether Yules would have to go for an HIL or not is irrelevant. He's off. Talking about major players, Pat Lambie for me was the player in rugby union, at least in the last 5-6 years. He's the same age as me. Who had a set of serious concussions, and before he had his concussions, he was quite aggressive in defence, as all South African fly halves and fullbacks generally are. They're generally pretty physical players. And after he had his last serious concussion, he starts wearing the scrum cap. He's more tenuous in defence. He's a little bit more anxious with the play, and he eventually retired at the age of 28. He retired because of concussion. Um, Steve Thompson, the former England front row forward, who won the World Cup 2003 in rugby union, doesn't remember the World Cup final. Doesn't remember the World Cup final at all. And while he was a great player, he didn't play much longer after the World Cup either. He retired quite soon after the World Cup. I met Steve Thompson. He was a really affable guy. I met him when I was a teenager because their training base is near to where I live, and the England team used to go on cinema trips in groups. And they would rotate who went to the cinema, who went bowling. They wouldn't all go to one thing. They used to rotate and do sort of like team group bondings where they would take a small group of players who may not have been teammates at club level, who may not know each other very well, and they would do a social activity. And then I met Ben Cohen as well. All very, 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 very friendly. But Steve Thompson doesn't remember a lot of his career. He doesn't remember the World Cup final, and that is generally worrying. That you know that is the case. We've seen it in a lot of sports. Ice hockey and the NFL have obviously been facing the CTE lawsuit, and Again, there was a Carolina Hurricanes player last night taken off the ice on a stretcher. It was a really nasty looking incident. Another dirty hit. We want to get dirty contact out of sport. There is no doubt on that. There is no doubt you want to take dirty play out of accidental contact, especially in rugby with a boot to the face, in a ruck or more in a tackle, you land awkwardly. It's going to happen. That is going to happen. But when it's deliberate high shots, much like with Latrell Mitchell and Joseph Manu at the end of last season, that was quite bad. And to be fair, the fact that Joe Manu tried to play on for a, he wanted to play on, and then his cheek exploded. It was a sign you're going off. But I can go back to the 2014 Grand Final, where Sam Burgess collides, breaks his cheekbone, and James Graham was like, even though they're opponents, and there's the heat of battle, was like, mate, your face looks bad. You need help. There was James Graham knew that his opponent was seriously hurt. It wasn't an intentional head clash. He's gone in to make the hit. Heads have collided, and Sam Burgess, his cheekbones completely exploded, much like Joseph Manu. And it was bad. His whole face you can see it physically as he's running, wobbling around, and he's in trouble. But he plays most of the game. What you make of that? Oh, it's a warrior, but long term, yeah, that's a problem. The Ryan Mason, that was a fractured skull. Obviously, didn't want to play anymore. He retired because of that. Much like Petr Cech, you could argue the Petr Cech incident was that dirty play by Hunt, playing for Reading at the time, leaving the knee in, colliding with him. There was a medical reason why Petr Cech's skull fractured easier than say you or me, because he's a triplet and therefore your skull's generally thinner. But the Nobby Styles, you've got to remember the Nobby Styles, you've got to remember the balls they were using were a lot heavier. So the technology has improved massively from the 80s, 70s, and 60s. Especially the 60s when Nobby Styles was playing, and of course it's a great shame what happened to Nobby Styles. But post-retirement, it doesn't matter if you're a high-profile player or one of the lower division players, there needs to be a better medical retirement fund. People go, they're professional athletes, get paid stupid money. If you look at, I look at this in my dad's case, because my dad, his best mate, ended up playing professional football in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and my dad joined the army because you could actually, so in lower league football, the average salary was below what a squaddy would get a year, so he had to make an economic decision. And I believe if me and my sister weren't born, my dad would have gone back to playing football or rugby. He would have definitely gone into a sporting career. But I think the decision was definitely cemented because when he was in the army, he had a couple of trials for a couple of semi-pro and professional clubs in the lower divisions of English football. Maidstone United and Aldershot. He had a couple of pre-season, tryouts for them. And then my sister was born, and then I was born, and back then, before the Sky TV money, lower league football, the wages weren't there. In regards to the issue about concussion, another serious injury as well. Let's not pretend it's just concussions that's a problem, although that is a big one. Other injuries as well, repetitive injuries to shoulders, neck, backs, knees, ankles, internals, rib injuries, the whole lot. Players getting rushed back before they're ready. And that's to do with the amount of money within sport now. Players are being rushed back before they're physically fit to do so. And then it's the recuperation process. I mean, some of the injuries that NHL players, NFL players, NRL players, AFL players play through is ridiculous. You wouldn't see me do that. In regards to the bag tackle technique, I've been watching the NRLW, the women's version of the NRL, and their tackle technique is far better. And commentators in the game, experts in the game are saying it's refreshing to see better tackle technique, cleaner tackle technique, the game played in a better spirit. Same with rugby union when I did the autumn international and I watched all the autumn internationals. Again, I was very critical of the men's tackle technique over the women's. The ruck and the maul was tidier. The tackle technique was better. There was less dirty hits. There were less head knocks because the tackle technique was better. So yes, tackle technique definitely has something to do with it. The Yules one, I didn't watch any Six Nation games this weekend, but there was two high-profile incidents. Thomas Thomas Williams and the Yules red card and tackle technique was a big reason why there were two players going off the field, and not able to return. You are meant to hit with the correct shoulder. When I say the right shoulder, if you're left shoulder dominant, obviously that's the shoulder you lead with in your head position. The right shoulder dominant, the same applies. If you're ambidextrous like me, you can put in with either shoulder. And as long as you get your technique right, knowing you're leading with the left or the right and putting your head in the correct position, you shouldn't have a problem. If you're leading with this shoulder, your head's going that way. You don't want to be leading with your head in the wrong shoulder. And that's where players like Lee Halfpenny have a problem because they lead the wrong shoulder. Yeah, look, I don't watch the NFL anymore. I've fallen out of love with American football and the CFL. But yes, the tackle technique is absolutely appalling, leading with the helmet, the lack of wrapping technique with the arms. So you're just flying like a missile, which in rugby league and rugby union has been outlawed. Now the point of contact as well, you can get concussion from whiplash effect. So you may not hit the head, you may hit the body, and it may be a completely clean contact. And that's something else that needs to be looked at. Concussion is never going to be taken out, and other injuries aren't going to be taken out of some of these contact sports. But there are ways to mitigate the risk by enforcing the rules, even if it's accidental contact with the head or an accidental late hit, because late hits happen and they're not intentional to go out and hurt the player. But the punishment should fit the crime. If they go to the judiciary or the site commissioner, go, yeah, I mistimed it, I hold my hand up, got it wrong, you can probably find they'll get a lower suspension. If, however, this player's had several times in front of the disciplinary committee going, well, that's the third head hit we've had this season off you, your suspension's getting longer. And there's been a debate in the NRL about a thing called loading, so a previous bad record of a player. They're not looking at that this season. I think if a player keeps re-infringing in the same area in a suspendable offence, the suspension, you should add games to that. Doesn't matter what he's done before. If it is a repeat offence of foul play, I think the suspension should be longer for the player, in regardless of what the offence is. So you've got your league standards, say 4 games for a late hit, headshot, dangerous tackle technique, 4 games. Maybe you've stamped on a player. There's been a punch up, disrespect to an opponent, verbal, whatever. You get your league standard plus. Okay, you've been suspended before for this. Add 2 games, and then you can't have any complaints. They need to stop with the grading of 1, 2, 3 or A, B, C, category 1. They need to go right. Okay, that was a headshot, leading with the shoulder, contact with the head, minimum 4 games. Has the player been suspended before? No, he's got a good disciplinary record. Was it mistimed? Okay. Was it just poor technique? Did he show remorse to the player? That kind of thing. Get it set in stone. So if it's a leg twist and they've blown their knee out, a hip drop or something where they've deliberately targeted the knee, and it's seen as the ball's clearly gone and that is a late hit, and it's poor. He's committed, but there's a lack of wrapping action. Stop with the grading. Go right. Okay. Leading with the shoulder charge, bang, that's 4 games. Ice hockey, again, if you leave your feet, any hit where you leave your feet, that should automatically be a suspension. You're not allowed to leave your feet before contact. After contact, with the sheer force, if you leave your feet, that's different, but before contact. Yes, James Haskell, I went to the same school as James Haskell. I'm not his biggest fan because he comes across as a bit of a boorish kind of idiot at times. However, he was one of the, and probably still is one of the fittest players on the pitch for his cardio. He does a lot of gym work. He is a back row forward, one of the more physical positions in the game. Most tackles, they generally do the most tackles in rugby union. And I will say this, he's not wrong. An ice hockey collision is the equivalent to a car accident at 40 mile an hour at full pace. If we're talking about full pace, open ice hit, that is the equivalent to a 40 mile an hour car accident. Generally speaking, you need to get chucked over in the hospital after a 40-mile-an-hour car smash. Your airbag will deploy, the seatbelt will jerk you forward, and you will probably have whiplash. That's how physical an open ice hit is, because you've got two bodies going at about 40, 50 mile an hour colliding. At speed, at pace, bang. Rugby, pretty similar. Speed's a bit lower, but you're going into contact. Maybe a single person going into three men, rugby league, for example, that's a big hit. Um, that does take a toll on the body. Doesn't matter if it's a clean hit or not. Sports wise, what do I prefer? Women's football, cricket, or I prefer the women's rugby league because they've tailored the rules to the women's game. So it's not exactly the same game. They don't have the six again rule. They have the They don't have a 40-20. They make it a little bit shorter because their kicking distance is a little bit less. They don't have the kicking power, and it's 35-minute halves in the NRL rather than 40. They've extended that because it's still an amateur semi-pro game. There's very few full timers on elite contracts. So women's rugby league in the NRL, the NRLW, I prefer it over, let's say, women's association football. The issue with women's association football is they've expanded too quickly, I think, and they haven't started on a small base and tried to grow it gradually. I think they've over expanded too quick, and there isn't enough quality there yet to say there's enough quality players globally to justify the amount of media time they're getting. I understand why they want to grow the game, but the quality isn't there. It's refreshing to watch it, but yeah, and there are ways to do it. But Australia's a world leader when it comes to women's professional sport by some margin. I think the way they've slowly grown the NRLW and they've slowly extended the pit of the halves from 30 minutes to 35. They haven't gone for the full 40 yet, and you know they've got, I think, a 20-30 kind of kick rather than a 40-20 or a 20-40. So they don't expect them to kick the ball as far. They don't expect them to charge in for 40-minute halves. It's 35-minute halves. That's 10 minutes less a game. They don't have the six again rule because they know the fitness isn't there yet because it's not fully professional. There's only a few professional players on elite contracts. It is refreshing to watch it though because it's like watching rugby league in the 90s. And if you look at the replays from the 80s games, a lot of those players were still, while they were rugby league players, they also had jobs outside of the game. And if you look at the replays of this guy scored a try, they'll put his occupation and how long he's been a rugby league player as well. So there were guys who were electricians by day, rugby league players on a weekend. The NRLW is good. It's got a good starting point. They've only got 6 teams at the moment. Obviously, the Warriors pulled out due to the COVID pandemic and issues with finance and players wanting to return back to New Zealand because, again, not full timers. A lot of players do have issues post retirement with health issues. I know Matty Johns had a back operation last year. Um, you've had issues with like Cooper Cronk. If you look at his nose, he doesn't have one. It's completely his nose got broken very early in his career. Sam Burgess, his shoulder. And I'm not a fan of Sam Burgess. His off-field indiscretions and the way the media reported that was wrong, but he's facing court issues. Some players do play on until their late 30s, early 40s, like your Cameron Smiths, your Jamie Peacocks, your Jason Leonards in various codes of rugby. So there are some players who do push it right. Your Backies Boaters, your Victor Matfields, they go right until their late 30s, possibly pushing 40, but it's a rarity. A lot of players are done by their mid-30s. Some are even by their late 20s. It's a fact. I mean, look at the amount of surgeries Johnny Wilkinson had. I mean, he did play till he was about 37, but look at his body. His body has been repaired a lot, mostly in his 20s. His peak years were decimated by injury. It was knees, it was ankles, it was shoulders. His shoulders were Keith Wood. He retired 19 years ago. 19 years ago, he retired. He was told he could be paralysed if he carried on playing. So he retired at the end of the 2003 World Cup. The fact Johnny Sexton is gone until he's 36, will be retiring next year is a miracle. some of the injuries he's had. Brian O'Driscoll had some really nasty injuries. Gordon Darcy's career was cut short. His centre partner, possibly the best centre partnership in the Northern Hemisphere, if not world rugby, for just how they were. Gordon Darcy's slight of foot, skillful, and Brian O'Driscoll, just how many caps he got was ridiculous. But yeah, Peter Stringer went till he was 40. I mean, he was a scrum half, so that says something. But yeah, for the most part, they're done 30 to 35. The pace of the game has increased so much and the physicality has increased so much that the fact we're seeing 100 cap players even now astounds me. It's ridiculous. I'm so surprised so many have reached the 100 cap club. Like Sergio Parise went on till quite late, and he might still play some more games. You've got Richie McCaw. The position they play in the back row, that's telling something about how physically fit they are, but their bodies must be wrecked. Martin Castro Giovanni's another one, front row forward. It's mad, but yes, a lot of them would be crippled if they play an extra 5 years. It's the shoulders, it's the necks, it's the backs, your knees, your joints go, basically. A lot of them have osteoarthritis, and it's not overly pleasant. Well, that cup of tea was nice sugary cup of tea. But yes, I want to start on this because of what I've seen over the weekend. No, Gronkowski actually retired. He was lured out of retirement by the fact he could play with Tom Brady at the Buccaneers, but he's had so many concussions, so many, and he gets parodied in the media like Family Guy as this bit of a jock, not overly intelligent, but he's had a lot of blows to the head. I can see Gronkowski having problems in the next 10, 15 years and being seriously ill. And I'm saying that with respect. I mean, physical as a specimen. My God, he's an athlete, but some of the injuries he has sustained over his career make me wince. And yeah, I wouldn't want that on anyone. Right, just going to put my cup back in the kitchen. I shall be back in 30 seconds. Oh, right, we're back. We are back. Yes, the Gronkowski. When he retired, I thought, right, fine, he's retiring on a high point. He's had a great career with the Patriots, etc., etc. And then Brady and Gronkowski got sort of lured out of retirement by the Buccaneers, win one more Super Bowl together. Amazing to me that Tom Brady went until his 40s. I know they've changed the rules over the quarterback and protecting them from late dirty hits. I think if Tom Brady was playing 20 years earlier, had he been drafted 20 years earlier, his career is a lot shorter. There's no doubt on that. And the CTE lawsuit over the last decade or so has really highlighted the issues with player welfare. If you watch the Aaron Hernandez documentary series on Netflix, it's chilling. Yes, I was going to say Aaron Hernandez, as I said, yeah. The Aaron Hernandez one, when they looked at his brain, it was like he had late stage dementia. He was a lot younger than me, actually, when he passed away. Really troubling. But he was having issues back in high school and college. There were reports of really bizarre, dangerous behaviour. Obviously, it's transpired he was bisexual. His sexuality's got nothing to do with it personally, I don't think. But the autopsy on his brain was terrifying. And the same can be said in the NHL, especially with those enforcer types or power forwards, those really physical players. So Derek Bugard, for example, again, really, really troubling. The Minnesota Wild and the New York Rangers were taken to task by his family over the medical care. It's not that he got concussions. It's when he went to the Rangers, he had a concussion, and they just prescribed him, medications and didn't really keep an eye on him taking those medications. Of course, he started drinking alcohol with them, and that led to him having a heart attack basically in his sleep. But when they looked at his brain, it it's when they sent him to a specialist, and the specialist asked him, how many concussions do you think he had? Rather than the official ones that are on the record where he's been pulled out of the game or he's missed training because he's not well. They went, how many concussions have you actually had? And he said hundreds. It doesn't matter what role you're playing. If you're a skilled player or not good, but a physical shutdown player, power forward, enforcer type, gritty, grinding type. He just throws the big hits. We'll throw Knuckles, like Chris Nyland, Knuckles Nyland, underrated player. But I watched a documentary about him after Bob Probert died. There was an interview with Ty Domi, on Spitting Chicklets podcast, and the Ty Domi in real life is completely different to Ty Domi on the ice. And there was a few interviews done because obviously his son Max is now playing in the NHL, and there was a moment where they were interviewing Ty Domi and he cries, and he's really visibly shaken, especially after Bob Probert died. He was very visibly shaken. And again, well, Bob Probert didn't die of Parkinson's or had dementia or anything like that at the time. He obviously died of a heart attack. And Bob Probert had other issues off the field, off the ice as well, with drugs and steroids. And this is something that needs to be looked at as well, the use of steroids and recreational drugs by pro athletes. And we can debate the pros and cons of marijuana use or recreational drug use or whatever, and the issues of prescription medication abuse is quite worrying. The Antonio Brown, I haven't read so much about him. I know there's a lot going on with some very bizarre behaviour with Antonio Brown, but the Aaron Hernandez 3-part documentary on Netflix generally made me feel, I don't know. It's the last episode for me where they talk about his prison time and then they look at his brain basically. There's been a lot of people like basically it's divided opinion basically. I don't think his sexuality necessarily is a problem. I think the problem is that the support networks were not there, and I think the NFL still has this culture where the support networks for mental health side things aren't there. And they interview another ex-player, an ex-teammate, and he's now openly gay and all that. Again, that's got and he goes, the support network's there, but when he went to see the psychologist about being depressed post-retirement, she goes, you're one of many who got depression after post-playing, had concussion, and also are concerned about sexuality or religion or whatever social side of things that the NFL isn't addressing. And I'm not a social, warrior or anything like that. He wants to hug trees and block a bypass or anything like that. But I'm a pragmatist. If you have an ongoing issue with mental health and physical health as well with players about, not what we're going to do after playing, the NFL does not have enough, programs in place and support in place to support ex-players, regardless if they're superstar. Or Tom Brady never has to work again, right? He could buy his own sports team. He could, live on a private island. But those league minimum players on league minimum salaries, careers are 3-4 years long at max. And we discussed this with the Major League Baseball. Lockout with the league minimum salary is the lowest and still is the lowest, even with this new CBA, the 4 major leagues. I forget the player's name, but he was a teammate of Aaron Hernandez from the defensive unit. And he got very, very depressed when his career ended. And he decided to retire from the game. He was still very, very young. He was like, I don't know what to do. And then he goes to the psychologist, and the psychologist was like, you're not the first player to come out and say asexuality or religion or concerns about post-playing, mental health, regardless if they were concussed or not. And it was, the support is not there right now. And if the NFL claims it is, that is BS. I think the NHL could do more for post-playing players, especially those on league minimum who don't really make it, don't make a lot of money, journeyman players who end up bouncing around the minors and the European leagues. And when they finally retire, there is not enough support in place because all they have done from a very young age, from juniors and midgets, is be told you're going to be a professional athlete. They're not prepared for post-playing. Now, not every player is going to go into a coaching role or a player development role or a role with head office or a role as a club ambassador. Not every player is going to go down staying in the game. There needs to be another avenue where they can go into actual industry and get skills and get jobs and be self-sufficient while still relying on the retirement fund that the NHL does have in place. I don't think the NHL does enough to look after players who have played. And this is where we're seeing the CTE lawsuit and other lawsuits in regards to, the retirement fund, giving support to players, the mental health support, the eviction support, support in finding and training for new careers outside of the sport. And this is replicated across the board. When athletes retire, they're put on the scrap heap and they are forgotten about. So then you look at the cases of high profile players who retired from their various sports and it's gone all wrong off the field. So I'm going to use Paul Gascoigne as an example. He tried his stint at management. It lasted 36 days at Kettering Town. Since then, his life has been a mess. You look at George Best to a certain extent. Yeah, I'm just going to leave that there. You look at so many sports. When a player retires, they just go off the radar. I wouldn't be surprised if Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, and Breeze, etc., not the advisors of what they can afford, they'll be suffering the same physical impacts and doing. If yeah, I wouldn't. I'll say Aaron Rodgers is a bit out. Aaron Rodgers is exceptionally intelligent. He's outspoken on a lot of issues, and people have canned him on social media in the last 2 years in regards to the COVID pandemic and etc. etc. And some of his views on vaccination and personal choice, mask mandates and lockdowns. But he's allowed to have those opinions. I think Aaron Rodgers is one of the more intelligent professional athletes when it comes to being articulate. I don't agree with all his opinions. I would say Drew Brees and Tom Brady. Actually, no, I don't. I think they're some of the more intelligent ex-players and current players within the NFL universe. I think they are exceptionally articulate and intelligent. The fact that they're some of the highest paid players in the NFL, yes, they can afford advisors like accountants and investment portfolios, and once they retire, their families are well looked after. They invest in property, or they can be an investor in business. They can probably set up their own business. They are exceptionally articulate. Pat McAfee has made himself obviously a media personality with his podcast and the Pat McAfee Show, and he got his hand at professional baseball as well. Pat McAfee, I love his podcast. It's Pat McAfee Show's hilarious. But when I do player welfare, I've done player welfare videos before, and they don't get a lot of views, and people aren't interested. They're only interested in what the superstars do on the field, or on the ice, or on the court, or they're cyclists or whatever it may be, whatever sport they're doing on the track. And some sports do better than others for looking after their ex talent. I have no doubt on that. You've got the Injured Jockeys Fund with horse racing, and a lot of ex jockeys end up becoming horse trainers or working in the media or investing in the agricultural, because it's a very rural sport. If you think about it, horse racing, they end up investing back in the sport, working, as jockey coaches and as mentors. But there is an issue with drug abuse within horse racing, especially flat jockeys. Kieran Fallon being a prime example. There are others as well, but there have been some high-profile suicides and high-profile legal cases in recent years in horse racing. Now you've got the animal welfare people who go, they should ban it and all this, and it's outdated. Da, 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 da. That's beside the point. If it's jump racing, the horses are better looked after than the jockeys. I'm a big fan of jump racing, not a massive fan of flat racing. I think the way the horses and the jockeys are treated in that, and the pressure for the jockey to make weight constantly, does put a lot of health, constraints and strains upon the jockeys. Whereas in jump racing, um, you can get the handicap, put lead weight in the seat and saddle to make the weight. If you're a lighter jockey, if you're a heavier jockey, you get put as top weight. They the physical constraints on a jump jockey, while it's a more physical version of the sport, national hunt racing, those jockeys are better looked after than the flat jockeys. I'm just going to put that out there. The horses are better looked after as well. If you're a jump trainer, if you don't feel the horses right, they don't race. Flat racing, I think the horses are not looked after well enough. I think the jockeys aren't looked after well enough. They're not supported well enough. And when they do have an issue with drug misuse, under especially cocaine and speed are the big ones, and MDMA to a certain point, um, they are thrown under the bus. In my opinion, they are thrown under the bus. In my opinion, but they're under such pressure to make weight. It's like boxing as well, and MMA. You have the weight divisions. Some of these boxers and MMA fighters really, and kickboxers, they have the weight divisions. They are really forced to make weight sometimes. We're talking they have to, and I'm not so sure that the way it worries me. It does. Um, but yes, the mental health, the drug abuse, alcohol abuse, they are all connected. And I'll go back to the Shane Warne situation where he obviously got caught doing drugs, and cricket just had never had this before. And I've watched a lot of his interviews. Like there's loads of interviews of Shane Warne on the internet right now, obviously after his passing, and he did mention the '93 Ashes series when he does the wicket, the ball of the century against Mike Gap, and he goes he wasn't prepared for the media spotlight being put on him at such a young age. And he has stated in later interviews when he goes, you know, yeah, you're going to make mistakes. I'm a human being. But every little mistake I've made, and other sportsmen as well, is just blown up in the media out of proportion rather than actually understanding what's going on. Now, so many disparaging articles and alleged things of his colourful private life, and it was a bit colourful in his 30s and 40s. It got a little bit outlandish. Um, yeah, that again, the media training, the spotlight, the media intrusion, the pressure put upon some of these, especially young men, is well, the Paul Merson situation. I do have a lot of sympathy for Paul Merson in regards to he's been very open and honest about his alcohol, drug, and gambling problems, and he keeps getting a lot of vitriolic crap on social media. Um, and this is why when we're talking about mental health, the suicide rate amongst men of our age group, the as I call the 18-30 club, it's the biggest killer. And I know, Chester, you're a little bit older than me. I'm in my early 30s. I know you're a little bit older than me, but it is. We've got health posters up around work about cancer. About prostate cancer is a big one because I think a couple of members of staff have had it, and so they're doing a big drive about prostate cancer at my work. Get yourself checked, all that kind of thing. Look after your health. There's a couple of the lads have had it, and I know a few people have had it as well. So there's been a big drive for that. They talk about the more at-risk groups. So if you're overweight, if you're from like an Asian or Afro-Caribbean background, you're more at risk of it. You're more at risk if you're over 50. You're less active. So a lot of the drivers are less active. So they're doing a drive about that kind of health thing because it's happened. It's happened in the workplace. So they're doing a big drive. And there's a big drive about prostate cancer right now anyway, because obviously. In regards to it's a symptom of mental illness, not an actual. That's my opinion. I can discuss addiction quite happily for hours on the other channel if you want. But it does link into this. The the culture within sport as well. There is a bit of a drink laddish culture still, especially in cricket and both codes of rugby, to a certain extent football as well. I think football still has that as well. You look at some of the party antics over the last 2 years of players, especially during the lockdown. Um, But the Paul Merson one is very interesting because one of his teammates was Tony Adams, and Tony Adams obviously, as a player, outstanding. As a manager, okay, a bit of a naff managerial career, but he's given it a go. But an addiction advocate for rehabilitation, he set up his rehabilitation centre. He is stunned by the amount of people who are still active professional athletes who are coming to his addiction centre. Not the ex players and the ex jockeys and the ex tennis players and the ex athletes who've retired. Current playing group of his demographic. So, and they're too afraid to say anything to their coach or their manager, going, "Oh yeah, I've got an issue with drinking too much, or I've got a gambling problem, um, and or I've got a I'm abusing painkillers or whatever it may be." And he is absolutely stunned. I've seen documentaries on that and interviews given about that. I don't think it gets enough press. Um, the cricket culture, we've seen it with the Pedalo incident back in Antigua in the World Cup in, I think, 2007, I think, or 2008, with Freddie Flintoff. I met Freddie Flintoff, and he still is a pisshead. And I say that because, I don't think he drinks as much now as what he did when he was in his 20s and early 30s, but Freddie Flintoff still likes to drink, and that is concerning to a certain extent. But yeah, I've seen the cricket culture at cricket social events. It doesn't matter what country in the world, apart from maybe say Pakistan or Bangladesh, for example, Muslim countries, but around the world there is definitely the cricket club kind of let's get on the source. Um, um, in regards to the cricket culture itself, when you've got someone like Jeffrey Boycott as I think Jeffrey Boycott's a lifelong board member because of, and the alcohol and domestic violence allegations, which he still contests are not true, even though he's found guilty in absentia in a French court. Let that speak for itself. In regards to Jeffrey Boycott, I'm not a fan of Jeffrey Boycott either. Um, if I want to fall asleep watching cricket, I will. You know, uh, the thing is, it doesn't matter your background because there's plenty of like James Milner, for example, is a famous teetotaler in football, famous teetotaler, and of course, a couple of his teammates in Mo Salah and Sadio Mane are from uh, Muslim backgrounds, and he's a famous teetotaler. Um, uh, oh, Mr. Tavern, hello. I have no earthly idea why the algorithm suggested your channel over a year ago. It must be one of the topics I was discussing a year ago, which you might have an interest in. But I do enjoy your visuals. Yes, it is criminally low, but obviously when the pandemic hit, there wasn't a lot to really talk about for 8 weeks, if I'm being honest, because the only news stories were coming out were kind of negative about player misbehaviour during lockdown and clubs trying to get government money when they were told they weren't allowed to get government loans, especially in football. And there wasn't a lot to really talk about sports wise for 8 weeks until the NRL and the AFL resumed in Australia when it comes to international sport on an international basis of sports that I follow. So I was just going by what the media releases were from like the NHL, the MLS, English football, or European football, rugby union, rugby league over here with Super League. I was just going by their press releases when they were saying this is the date, this is when we hope, this is the provisional date. There wasn't a lot to really talk about. It it was frustrating. So the last 2 years, yeah, I'm surprised that I'm still doing the channel, to be honest. But this is a hobby for me until obviously if it does make crack 1,000 subscribers, and we get the view hours up, and obviously the fact you enjoy it, get your friends or your work colleagues to give it a view. That's what I say. I mean, my mum's done that. My mum's got a few of her work colleagues to give it a view. I've got some of my work colleagues to give it a view. Some of my friends, and I appreciate some of their support. I've got subscribers all around the world, but yes, it's annoying that my subscriber count is lower than it should be. 2018 was peak for the channel, really. And for view counts, there was just more going on. There was more sporting stories going on of a positive nature. Um, I often find myself coming back to your takes on the goings on in the sporting realm, but usually not when I'm live. Your knowledge of global sports is rather impressive. Cheers. Well, when I first started up the channel, it was more of a personal vlog, really, and then Neymar got transferred to PSG for silly money, ridiculous money, and now we understand why Barcelona agreed to that transfers because they had run out of money um, long before the pandemic. Barcelona were basically bankrupt and it just exposed their poor financial management. And then Newcastle United were under investigation for tax fraud as part of a wider Anglo-French investigation into some dodgy dealings with agents. And then Mike Ashley officially openly said the club is up for sale. Then we had the Amanda Staveley and the Peter Kenyon takeover bids collapse. And then Amanda Staveley comes back again. Then it's blocked. And then she finally, with Saudi-backed consortium, gets the club. So Newcastle fans love me for the fact that I was brutally honest with the fact I didn't like Mike Ashley either. I'm not a fan of Mike Ashley. That's some really bad ownership right there. And then we look at the Chelsea situation right now, and we look at the Everton situation right now, and other clubs that have Russian money, like Arsenal. The Everton majority stakeholder still gets a dividend from Arsenal. Bournemouth have Russian money. And then it starts snowballing, going, okay, this is more than just Chelsea having problems. Everton, Bournemouth and Arsenal could also be sanctioned and also have problems with where the money comes from. And then we talk about the the fit of proper persons test, the profit loss margin of 135% rule. If the FA was to properly enforce that, 60 to 70% of the clubs would be in breach, and then there would be loads of clubs getting points deducted, and we can't have that. The player salaries, which have been a debate point in the last couple of months with the Major League Baseball lockout, wearing baseball gear here, as you can see, New Era, and Major League Baseball. So, I'm interested to know what Tav, what your favourite sports are, by the way. I'm very, very interested to see what drew you to channel. Apart from the algorithm, what actually made you want to subscribe, view the content, what your favourite sports are. I want to understand what the viewership wants a little bit. This is why I do these live streams, because you guys can put questions, and I can go, oh, that's a video idea. That's a topic idea to discuss. The BLM stuff during lockdown, which was a little bit annoying. I understand the social aspect of it, but the actual organisation is a pseudo-Marxist, neo-Marxist take on Marxism. They want to, defund the criminal justice system and the police, which ironically will lead to lawlessness. Although the government we've got debate on that. I'm not a fan of pseudo-Marxism or neo-Marxism. I'm not a fan of the hard left or the far right. I think they have no place in society. However, we're seeing the major parties in politics start to lurch that way again a little bit much. And I think the pandemic has exposed some social divisions that were bubbling over the last 15 years. And the haves and have-nots and the way society has been bubbling along. There have been some undercurrent and some rather unseemly incidents. We've seen incidents in football, rugby, cricket, and the everyday fan or the everyday person, we're feeling the pinch. I mean, I'm meant to get a pay rise next month, but with the way prices are going up, I might not be able to afford to feed myself and pay my rent and council tax. Now, my rent and council tax comes first. I might have to go to the food bank. I'm in a decent paid job. Could be paid better. But I've got work. I've worked solid throughout the pandemic, apart from when I was off sick, but I'm still employed. I've only had 3 weeks off during this pandemic out of work. I'm not taking holiday or I'm, out of work. 3 weeks. 3 weeks in just under 2 years I've had time off. Total danger. BMO in the USA, the leader has multiple. Yeah, I've heard of certain things about not just that social movement, that political movement, but others as well, where they're not all they seem. I try and keep politics off the channel, unless it's to do with bidding for a World Cup, bidding for an Olympics, bidding for a Euros, where you need a bit of government support for that bid, with the infrastructure and spending. But what we've seen is this time 2 years ago, sport was shutting down, and on I think it's the 22nd. Yeah, because I moved out of my flat this time 2 years ago. I moved out of my flat on I think it will be the 9th or 17th, 2020. I moved out of my old flat, if you remember that. And I moved back to my family, my extended family's home for a little bit. Then I moved here in the August. So this time 2 years ago, I was preparing to move out of my flat. Uh, uh, I will discuss, Tavern. Actually, Tavern, I've got a question for you. I want to understand what your favourite sports are and what drew, apart from the algorithm, what was the first video you watched, and what questions you have, and what your favourite sports are, because then I can go, that's a good video idea. I can look at this person's career. I've got to do a Shane Warne video at some point, and I've had a lot of questions about Shane Warne. I'll have a breakdown of his career, playing career and post-playing career, without going too much about his off-field dramatics. But I will talk about his drugs ban. That's important. Um, but yeah, the last 2 years, what annoyed me was I've worked solidly through this, and I've got no problem with people being put on furlough and having that income support. No problem with that. I was more than happy to, make sure the wider population, because the job I do is a key worker position, essential service in waste disposal. It's got to be done. We don't do it. The pandemic, other health issues, cholera. Yes, cholera is still a thing. Typhus, typhoid, dysentery is still a thing. Without proper waste disposal, other diseases can spread, and public health, it becomes a whole nightmare. So my job is still important. I had to go to work, um, and yeah, it was a bit frustrating. There was nothing to discuss sports wise. It was, and I think that harmed the channel's growth a little bit. But when I'm going to work because I have to, and I was not. I'm on better money now than what I was at my previous job, same industry, and I'm going to work, and then you've got these high-profile, especially football players in this country, misbehaving quite badly, and then putting it on social media as well. It was just like, um, you know, that pissed me off. These are maybe role models for young kids. And then we see like so many people breaching, and then when we find out the government's been doing it, well, see why these sense of entitlement. And then obviously we've seen what's happened with Benjamin Mendy and Mason Greenwood, Gilfie Sigurdsson, the unnamed. I think it's an unnamed Brighton player. There's been some high profile off field legal issues that some of these players are facing. The Mason Greenwood thing's gone very very quiet, but um, the the it didn't help with the public relations image that especially football wanted to have. When rugby league and cricket were like, we're really struggling financially, like we need help. Um, you know, we're not as wealthy. Can you help us? Rugby league and the RFL and the ECB got emergency loans from the government, and this is where politics and sport, I think, has no choice but to meet. You know what I mean? Professional sport. And then we saw the delayed Olympics, and we saw the delayed Euros, and then we've seen the Winter Olympics, and obviously we've seen mandates saying no crowds in attendance for various things, or limited capacity trials, and then the vaccination passports to go to indoor arenas and outdoor arenas, and there was a lot of issue with that. And now we're seeing crowds in healthy numbers again coming back in. Um, it's it's an interesting one. I think, um, in that regard, when it comes to a public health emergency, yeah, government can say your sport's suspended. If there's like been a natural disaster like flooding or anything like that, you can say the government's saying it's not safe to operate your sport in this area. We're going to have to either move your team temporarily or suspend operations. Like 9/11, for example, back in the US, every sport shut down for because no teams could go anywhere for travel. So there was no travel for like 5 6 days. So sports just stopped. And you can understand why it was a state of emergency. But in regards to professional sport, I mean, the fact that government ministers and members of parliament have been going to the sport and media select committee and raising concerns about sports governance, um, raising concerns about who owns what within sport. You know, that's where I'm seeing concerns, in my opinion, that we're having the question mark about Chelsea and Everton and Arsenal and Bournemouth, and I will use those other clubs because it's not just Chelsea that has Russian or had Russian money tied up in them. And then we're talking about the block takeover of Newcastle and the eventual takeover of Newcastle. What could happen with Chelsea? They were given a special operating license, a whole host of things. And the question mark is, okay, then, well, the authorities, the sporting governing bodies have been so weak and they didn't care where the money came from for so long that now it does reek of hypocrisy. Because 20 years ago, they didn't care that, you know, this was happening. And then, just before COVID, Berry go out of business. And then people were asking questions of the EFL and the FA going, well, you're not allowing Bolton to go out of business in the same league, but you're allowing Berry to go out of business. And then fan groups were pressuring the EFL to do something. Going, well, we need to change the rules on if the league should step into an emergency takeover themselves and do the day-to-day running of the club to keep the competition, going. And so that said to me that the signs were there that, at least in football sporting sense, the bubble was overheating. There was, something was going horribly wrong. As the pandemic, Macclesfield goes out of business. Only one club has failed so far post-pandemic. That's Macclesfield. But they've been reformed and they've already got their first promotion. So, and Bury have technically been reformed as well. So just before the pandemic, a club goes out of business, and just after a club goes out of business. But there's been question marks over the whole structures of football in this country, including in Scotland as well. And some of the TV deals. There's been huge question marks over some of the media rights deals, and fan groups are getting more and more frustrated because they're the ones who we were told. I'm going back to an older survey done about 2015, 2016 season, and they broke down the numbers, and the clubs were claiming they could let us in for nothing, or £10 or less, or nothing. Half the league was saying we could let them in for a tenner. Half the league was saying we can still make massive profits without fans in attendance. That proved to be a lie, which meant the clubs were cooking the books. It's not just Chelsea and oligarchs. This could come back to bite Man City, Newcastle, and other. Yep, absolutely. It could back any overseas-owned club, quite frankly, or even domestically owned club, because it's the directors' test. It's where the money's coming from. Like, look at the Oystons at Blackpool. There was criminality there. The Venkies at Blackburn, never ever in their lives had they had run a sporting team, not even in India when it came to the IPL and things like that was being formed at the time. They had no history in the sports industry, none. Yes, the 50+1 rule, that has been discussed. It's the German model, but it's not law in Germany. It's just the trend in Germany. I think Bleifield, is the club, or Hoffenheim is another club that don't have that model, but for the most part, it works very effectively. But it's not enshrined in the German FA's rulebook that you have to have the 50+1. It's just the preferred way of running a football club. What the government is saying, and fan groups, and there are certain people within the game are saying, and it's the same for rugby union and rugby league as well. I can see this, and ice hockey and other sports, not just in this country, but across Europe to a certain extent. Memberships in the NRL as well and AFL. There's a lot of club members, so they actually have club members sit on the board. American sports is different because the franchise system, but there is definitely a push for more fan representation. Fan group, or fan club members, so season ticket holders or club members, to have a position on club boards. It works very effectively in Germany. To a certain extent, I would say Spain is flawed and Italy is flawed because, again, a lot of them have got club memberships and they elect club presidents, but we can see that that's still flawed. Well, yes, I think he's now given over ownership of the club for nothing, and he's written off the debt the club owes him. Well, that just tells you how badly financially run Chelsea actually was. They're not making any money. Okay, Blackburn, right? Yeah. Another Blackburn fan. Woo! Probably the reason I scroll. There aren't many of us about outside Lancashire. No, there isn't. I know about 3 outside Lancashire. I also know 2 Yeovil fans as well, not including my family, which is something. Yeah, it's not a football jersey you see a lot in the south of England. I can tell you that. Yes, it's not. I think it must be my history of Blackburn Football Club. You must have subscribed because of that. That's the only video I've done in regards to. I try and keep videos of the teams I support off the channel, if that makes sense. I've done a video on the Canberra Raiders and the history of them. I think I've done a video on the London Broncos history as well. Although I can revisit that and look at my rugby league playlist. I've done a video on Blackburn, and I've done a video on the Bradwell Bees, and now just the Bees ice hockey team. So I've done a video, I think, a few videos on the Winnipeg Jets, another team that I follow. But I don't, I try and avoid doing videos on the teams I support because then you can get criticised being you're a fanboy or biased, etc., etc. But when I'm doing a video like my round one review of the NRL, for example, I did drop in Canberra one. I'm happy with that. This time last year, we lose that game. So I think that's a positive result. We were in the lead, the opposition come back. We're now behind against the Cronulla Sharks, another team that I follow in the NRL, so I couldn't really lose that game, really. And then we come back and win. Last season, we go on to lose that game. Season before we win that game, but last season we had a bit of an issue with our second half performances or first half performances not being great, and being in a winning position and losing from a winning position. I think it happened 7 times last year. So I try and avoid doing videos about the clubs I support unless, for example, a manager gets sacked, major transfer, and/or ownership takeover, which has not happened at any of the clubs I follow since I've been doing the channel. Apart from the our local ice rink shutting down with the Bees playing, they had to go play slap. Apart from that, there's I try, and apart from I think the Jets making the conference final in the playoffs in 2018, I don't do a lot of videos on the teams I support. I try and stay as unbiased as possible. I try and be as pragmatic and as balanced as I possibly can. Although I've had some criticism from Welsh Rugby Union. Anytime I do a video on the Welsh Rugby Union, especially a match review, there's always someone who just deliberately dislikes the video for whatever reason. They just don't agree with my opinion. Wales lost their team in this time. Couldn't care less. I hate both. I hate England and International Rugby Union. I hate Wales. It's just weird. So yeah, whenever I'm doing a match review of the Welsh team, I just get abuse from Welsh fans because they think I hate them. No, I don't hate Wales. I don't like their style of play necessarily, and I'm not so sold on their coach. But the issues within the club game in Wales is what I think is hampering Wales long term and risks undoing all the hard work that Gatland and Wayne Pivot to a certain extent have done since 2002, 2003, whenever it was the Warren Gatland took over. So, what jersey it? What jersey it is? I still wear my 2006, 2007 jersey because my dad. That was the last football jersey my dad bought me before he passed away. He gave me a few other birthday, Christmas presents since then, but that was the last football jersey my dad bought me. Um, and I started my jersey collection because of my dad. I started with the 94, 95, continued with the 2002 League Cup winning jersey, which is in his coffin now. And then I got some Liverpool kits as well, simply because my dad was a Liverpool fan and was trying to convert me as a kid. It just didn't work. But I've got the 1997 UEFA Cup, a third alternate yellow with red sponsorship, which is it is literally a fluorescent yellow kit, one of their worst away third kits ever. But it's now a cult classic. Got one of them. I've got a 1970s, 74 Brazil. I think I've got a 1974 Brazil replica. I've got obviously my ice hockey and rugby union and NFL stuff. So because of my dad, I started my jersey collection. Uh, so I've got that. I still have my 94, 95, but obviously it's child size, so I can't get in anymore. I mean, that would be a significant. I would probably hurt myself getting it. But there's always those retro websites that sell retro kits. There's eBay and things. I would love to get my hands on a 94, 95 replica again. They are hard to find these days. They are a cult classic. Um, and it is what it is. I wasn't overly keen on the black and red away. Never was keen on the black and red away strip. But now looking back on it, it is a cult classic, that black and red away strip. But I was never overly keen on it at the time. But yeah, like I still occasionally get the Blackburn jersey out, but my current my 2006 2007 one is not in the best of conditions. So I think it's about time I got a replacement. Um, I'm not overly keen on the last couple of seasons. The colour blue, I'm not overly keen on it, and I'm not. I know we've got the Totally Wicked sponsor, which is better than the Dapper Bet we had before. I'm not a big fan of betting sponsorship in sport. I never have been, never will be. Um, Apart from horse racing, and I'm not overly keen on sports betting companies. It troubles me, as I talked about addiction earlier. Um, no, I think the Blackburn, it's just the away kit at the time. It was like very similar to Man City's away kit in the colours with the black and red. I just wasn't keen on it, but it has grown on me. It is a cult classic. Um, yeah, my dad was a Liverpool fan as well. And it pissed my dad off when he was alive that we had won the Premier League and Liverpool hadn't at that point. They won the Premier League 10 years after he passed away, which is a shame, but you know it's what it is. It just happens that way. Uh, uh, you know, I think fans look back on old kits with nostalgia when they taste success, regardless of how hideous they are. There are some kits that just should never have been worn. Some of them really are eye gougingly beautiful. You really feel physically ill. Where do I see Super League going in the future? More competitive league or not? Um, I have concerns about the Super League and the fact that there's too many governing bodies. You've got Super League, you've got RFL, you've got the another arm which deals with the commercial side. Who's actually in charge of the game? The quality gap between Super League and the NRL is huge at this point. Um, just the gap there in quality from what I saw at the weekend is streets ahead. There are ways to fix Super League, but the powers that be, there's too many administrators and not enough direction. So I'm concerned about Super League. I really am. My father passed through lockdown years local sport. So my dad. My dad passed 12 years ago now. And of course, Liverpool hadn't won the Premier League in his lifetime, which was a bit of a bugbear. And I used to wind him up about that, but he understood my wind up because we'd only won the League Cup since then, so they had a bit more important silverware than us since 1995. And then they finally become the seventh team from the Premier League. So there you go. And people going, what? Seven teams have won? Yeah, seven teams won the Premier League. Even Leicester won the Premier League before Liverpool, so just let that sink in. Um, but yeah, I think there are some kits which I go are truly, truly ugly and should just never been designed. Whoever designed them was clearly on crack. There was a lot of kits and a lot of sports in the '90s that left looking back on them. While they're cult classics, they're very, very collectible because a lot of them weren't sold or bought or they weren't very popular. Now collectors want to get their hands on them and they're really, really expensive, which is why when Nigeria went back for that 94 retro design for the World Cup a couple of years ago, they sold out in less than a day. Within a day, they'd sold out, and Adidas had to basically suspend further orders until they could get enough stock back into the online stores and into brick and mortar stores across the world because they could not make them fast enough. That was the fastest selling football kit of all time, was the Nigeria 2018 World Cup kit. Ridiculous how quickly that sold. Absolutely ridiculous. Um, so I'm looking forward to this year's World Cup to see what the kits are like, because if they sell as fast as that, the manufacturers will be breaking it in. I don't know how much. I mean, some people were buying them and then reselling them for triple value, scalping. People were buying 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 at a time, bulk ordering in a couple of sizes, so medium, large, extra large, for example, and then selling them at 3 times, 4 times face value, because you get discounts with bulk orders. If you go on the Adidas website, you get like if you order 3 items, you get like 20% off. So if you're ordering 6 items, that's 20% off twice. And then if you order 9 or 10, people are bulk buying, getting a discount, and then scalping and then selling for major profit. And that frustrated a lot of people who just wanted to get the kit. Um, and that was a bit of a bugbear. But I don't like it's the same. The only thing that is illegal is reselling sports tickets. That's the only thing that's so scalping sports tickets. Um, World Cup predictions. I think it's too early to predict because obviously it was what happened with Russia and Belarus basically being kicked out of FIFA World Cup and UEFA competitions indefinitely. They've been kicked out of World Cup qualifying, so that's affected the playoffs to get in. Not every team's qualified yet, so therefore I can't make um, that kind of prediction yet when it comes to the World Cup. And because it's been played at a weird time of year, I think it might benefit the South American teams simply because of the way the time of the year their league is played, and it might also benefit those teams that have seasons at different times. So there's certain Northern Hemisphere teams that don't play in the Northern Hemisphere winter that may benefit them simply because they will have that lengthy winter break anyway. So those players that, let's say, play in some of these leagues might have. We could have a few shocks in this World Cup. I'm not going to predict anything, but I'm saying now World Cup shocks are on. Simply because of where we're playing. Italian rugby losing 35 in the row in the Six Nations. They're still better than Georgia and Romania and Spain by some margin and Portugal. Portugal, I think, and Georgia are the ones that are improving the most in the second tier European nations, but it's the money. Because the two top Italian teams play in the United Rugby Championship, they have money. And they have a very good use. Their under 20s are actually doing really, really well. So they've got some really great young players coming through that in a year or 2 or 5 years. And they gave Scotland a real good game as well. It wasn't as if they were being blown off the pitch. The Ireland game is just an aberration with what happened there when they were down to 13 players. Same with the England Ireland game. Ireland have benefited from some very cushy refereeing and inconsistent refereeing. And the referees have been consistent on the head contact and the hits. But Irish players have got away with similar foul play and not been cited, not been sin binned, and not been sent from the field. So Ireland have actually benefited from some favourable refereeing in the last 2 games. Now, I didn't watch any of the Six Nations game this weekend, but that doesn't mean I can't make that comment going. It seems a little bit coincidental that in the last 2 games Ireland have played against opposition that historically, even Italy have beaten Ireland a few times, historically they don't necessarily have the best record against for and against head to head. It's a little bit, let's stand back a little bit, study this. They've benefited from 2 red cards and a yellow card against opposition, which, while England put up a spirited performance yesterday, you've still got to question that when Irish players have got away lightly with some foul play and repeat infringements, whereas the opposition hasn't. You have to start looking at that, and you also have to start questioning refereeing common sense. And I think the World Rugby have to look at, okay, right, now do World Rugby go into all the domestic leagues, send someone around to all the, get all the club coaches in at meetings at the beginning of the season, say, right, tackle technique, head high shots, bang, this is, because this rule's been in place now for a couple of years. This is what cost Danny Cipriani. He got sent off in a game. And he was standing there. It wasn't if he was leading the shot. He was standing, the guy runs into him, and as he's falling, he hits his head. Cipriani was like, what does he? He can't get out of the way. Gets a red card. So this rule has been in place for a little while. So here's the thing. I don't think they should be kicked out, but they're part of the stakeholders. All Six Nations would have to agree for a replacement to come in, and they own a sixth of the product. So I can't see that happening. And they're still too good. They would still beat Georgia. They would still beat Portugal. They would still beat Romania, and still beat Spain every time. So until those tier 2 nations can beat, the tier 1 nations, it's not going to happen. I hold out hope every Six Nations that Wales will still get the wooden spoon purely because my best mate is Welsh. It's looking promising. It is. Italy would have to put in the performance of their lives against them, but it's not out of the realms of possibility. Wales aren't playing well. Italy would have to put in the performance of their lives. I think Wales have got some losing bonus points in there though, so that sort of makes it a bit more frustrating. And they've also won a game. But Wales won't get the wooden spoon this year. But Wayne Pivac, okay, they win last year. Wayne Pivac, there's been some question marks over Wayne Pivac and his coaching in comparison to Warren Gatland. His record overall isn't actually as good as people claim it is. He had a purple patch in the middle. His first period, if you break it down into thirds, his first period in charge wasn't great. after, and then it improves, and then it's not great again. So there is issues there, um, and you know there are concerns about the domestic game, the finances of the domestic game, the direction of the domestic game as well. Um, it is the national sport. It is the most popular sport in Wales, but there are concerns about the finances, the structures, um, the union's finances, not only the provinces in the United Rugby Championship, but the uh, domestic Premiership, which is the level below where the players come through. There's also an issue with if you look at the sports stars in the UK that are on the ban list for substance abuse, like steroids, performance enhancing, and recreational drugs. Welsh rugby players of both codes make up the highest proportion of athletes in the UK that are currently serving um, UK anti-doping and world anti-doping drugs bans. I watched a documentary about it, and it's still the case now. I can't remember the numbers, but they are the biggest group of athletes are Welsh rugby players of both codes. So there's an issue with the culture within the sport of steroid misuse, recreational drug use, um, other performance enhancers, so just doping in general. When it comes to goal kicking, why do you not be the kicker? It's just respecting the kicker. It's a thing. It's always been a thing. Um, it's sort of the culture of the fan base, although it has starting to be shifting a little bit more to less respectful. It's just the culture of the fan base. When it comes to the Southern Hemisphere, I think the Kiwi fans, the New Zealand fans, are the best when it comes to respecting the opposition and just enjoying of the game. And um, oh god, so you have an internal bet between your friendship group when it comes to wooden spoon. Although Wales, Scotland, and Ireland and France have all had the wooden spoon officially since Italy joined. So the only team since 2000 not to actually have the wooden spoon is England. But the way England are going right now as well with their ill discipline, coaches under pressure. Okay, Eddie Jones and Wayne Pivac. Gregor Townsend to a certain extent because Scotland are too inconsistent, but Jones and Pivac, guess what? They're both overseas coaches. They're both overseas coaches, and there's been a lot of, I'm not going to say concern necessarily, but there's been a fair bit of debate whether the national sides around the world should go with a national coach of the same background. Um, that's been something that has been on the agenda for some time, and that is a debating point. Now, England's football tried overseas coaches. We've tried two, and it didn't work. And we've circled back round to eventually we ended up with Southgate by Sam Allardyce getting caught out, basically admitting off the record officially that there's corrupt dealings going on in football. Who would have known? Who thought? But English football has tried the overseas experiment. Didn't work. Scotland tried it. Didn't work. So you know, Wales, Northern Ireland, and the Republic have always gone with people who have played for the national side, basically, or whatever. But Scotland and England have tried the overseas. Bertie Vokes was the Scottish manager. Have both tried the overseas manager experiment, and it hasn't worked. Um, and we are now seeing a trend, especially with the top nations in football, of going back to domestic managers from the country that Um, the day Italy don't finish at the bottom of the Six Nations, every player on the team that finishes below Italy should retire off the day. That's not fair. The under-20s beating England's under-20s the other week, though, was a statement of how they're developing their youth now and the pathways are working. And they've got some good players in their side right now. It's just getting there is a young team. It's just getting those combinations to work. So the pathways are working. Unfortunately, um, they had a peak team in the 90s, and after about 2005, 2006, a lot of their good players retired. There was only a handful that were class players, and it's gone on until about they were still reasonable until about 7 years ago. And the last 7 years has been a bit of a disaster. But every nation goes through their ups and downs, and you know they should have admitted Italy to the Six Nations a decade earlier, quite frankly, and it would have been a different story with player development. And this is the issue with professionalism as well, not having the desired effect. And there's been issues with professionalism argument and how, um, it hasn't been the universal, golden goblet of, oh, look, money. And this is where Augustine Pichot and Bill Beaumont, when they were doing that World Rugby election just before COVID, just after the World Cup, were at loggerheads over where the money goes. And Augustine Pichot, in hindsight, has been proved right. But he's now left rugby altogether. He left going on completely frustrated with the organisation. And suddenly Bill Beaumont starts putting in some of the proposals that Augustine Pichot was standing on his platform, which is just ridiculous. Just shows how much BS Bill Beaumont, status quo guy, was spewing out, because the big unions were like, spew this crap out. And Augustine Pichot was like, no, we can't keep doing this. And so now Bill Beaumont's taking Pichot's plans and using them. So there are issues at the top of the game. Do you think Ronaldo helps Manchester United win the Champions League? I'll be interested to know what you think makes it for the title. If I'm being brutally honest, I've discussed Man United to death on this channel with the issues they're facing on live stream. A lot of clubs, and it's more to do with the structures of the club behind the scenes. Player recruitment is one. Player development's another through the youth system, and still even now, Man United's youth system is still world class. 50% of players that have come through that system all time have ended up playing at least one game for the club. So it's a successful youth system. It's taking that next step. But obviously, with what's happened with Mason Greenwood off the field and other players, there's definitely a structural issue at the club. I don't think it's all Solskjaer's fault, or all Mourinho's fault, or Van Gaal's fault, or David Moyes' fault, the previous managers after Ferguson. I think even Ferguson was having issues towards the end. Just shows how good a manager he actually was. But there's definitely structural issues within the club, and at the same time, there is a frustrated, angry fan base that's actually had a lot of reason to be angry with the ownership since 2004. Yes, there's been success since 2004 under the Glazers, but less success. If you look at it, the first half of the Premier League era, they dominated. That's where most of their titles come. Since 2004, they've won a less percentage of the titles that have been doled out. The league has, yes, become more competitive. And before 2004, only 3 clubs have won the Premier League. Since 2004, 4 clubs have won the Premier League, including 5 clubs if you include Man United. And they are less successful. And part of that is to do with the debt the club has now got because of the Glazers, leveraged takeover, where they were borrowing money from other creditors to buy the club, to then service their debt back to their creditors, to eventually at some point make a profit. So, yes, there is clearly an issue within that dressing room. And people slate Solskjaer, but he's actually won silverware in another league. Oh, people go, it's the Norwegian league. It doesn't mean anything. It means something, because the 3 managers post David Moyes have all won trophies, be it in English football and in Solskjaer and Van Gaal's case, outside of English football. They've managed to turn clubs around and win silverware and be successful at other clubs. They come in there and it just doesn't work. Now, that can't be 3 managers, being crap, where they've won silverware. Can't be. It doesn't matter what league you've coached in, but if you've won trophies at another club, doesn't matter the league you're playing. If you've managed to win silverware at other clubs and you come in there and you can't, that does say that there are problems within that club. There is definitely. I think Harry Maguire, is he a bad defender? His time before Man United, no. His time at Hull, he deserved to move to a bigger club in Leicester. Time at Leicester, they've invested wisely in the money they got for Harry Maguire. And he was playing well at Leicester. He was having a decent time at Leicester, but he had a more senior. Wes Morgan was the senior centre back, you know, controlling that defence. He had more veteran players around him in leadership roles where he didn't have to be a leader. They've made him club captain. Mistake. He is still club captain. Mistake. Um, as far as I'm aware, they overspent for him because he had a good World Cup. But then again, a lot of the England players performed quite well at that World Cup and played quite well at the Euros as well. He's got to live up to a massive price tag, and he's obviously got to follow on from like players like Rio Ferdinand, Yapstam, Nemanja Vidic. You know, some really quality defenders have gone before him in the position that he's playing in, and there's a leadership vacuum. And I don't think Slabhead is his confidence is shot to hell. He's in a club that's always under the spotlight because it's the second city media-wise in the UK. There's a big media presence in Manchester. Um, you know, there's TV and newspapers that are national and global based in Manchester. There's a media presence. Um, the success of the club in the past, second most successful club in English football history after Liverpool. So yes, there is on trophies one. There is a lot more pressure going from Leicester, who've won some trophies, to Man United, who've also won a lot more trophies, but some trophies. And he's gone from a very settled, happy environment at Leicester, where the ownership at the top to the tea lady at the bottom. There is a positivity around that club, regardless of the results and what's happening on the field. There's a positive culture within that club and that organisation to a very toxic culture, which resonates from the top. That comes from the top. The culture of an organisation always comes from the top dog and goes downwards. And so, what can I say? He is living up to this big price tag. He's got this weight around his neck. He doesn't have another dominant leader alongside him. Is Lindehoff really a dominant centre back? I don't think so. Um, so there is a lack of leaders in that team. There's they've gone through a lot of managers in a very short space of time. The last, I think, 6 years, 7 years, they've gone through 4 managers. I think 8 years. That's a manager every 2 seasons. And there's always speculation about this and the Ranić situation. I don't understand. I do not understand why they've given him like basically 6, 7 months as interim, and then he's getting a consultancy role. I do not understand um, the the idea behind having basically just call him permanent manager till the end of the season and then a new contract, or you just while it's an interim appointment, it isn't because an interim will be in there for a couple of weeks. He's in there for the rest of the season, so it's just generally a mess. And you can say all the player attitudes. Yeah, they've down tools for every manager since Ferguson. I think at times during Ferguson's time in charge, there were some players who down tools. There is problems. Harry Maguire is just getting a load of crap on social media, mainstream media, and from the fans in general. He is being lampooned on social media, and that's going to affect anyone's confidence when you're a high profile athlete and you're just getting absolutely destroyed on social media groups on a daily basis. Yeah, that's going to do. And we're talking about player welfare and mental health. 20 years ago, he just gets, in the match with the journo will be going, okay, Maguire had a poor game again, form slipping, concerns. How can the manager address this? Does he need a break for a couple of weeks and being dropped from the team, extra training? Now it's, oh, look at this, Harry Maguire, he's helped the first 3 goals. Like, and well, some of the social media posts are actually quite funny because they are quite humorous. And football fans do have a weird sense of humour. At the same time, he's watching this every day. He's seeing this every day. It's not just the mainstream media anymore. It's now social media. It's people, giving him crap on social. This is where I think some of these. I understand why a lot of sports teams and players went on social media to engage with fans and be more transparent and open, engaging in that sense, and it keeps younger fans in tune with the game. But then you run the risk of just getting abuse, and it's going to be having an impact on him off the field. Has to. His mental health has just probably gone down the toilet. And he was a solid defender. He's not worth 84 million. 8.4 million, I think, would have been a fair fee to pay for him. But hey, his agent got him, a big transfer and some big money. So his agent's flipping his fingers. And Leicester are like, thank God we offloaded him, because they've invested wisely in their facilities with that money. I've noticed promising players who go to Man United are shocking but become good again when they leave. Yes, there is that debate of players improving. I think there is a toxic culture, absolutely. I think the culture's been toxic since about 2004 with the Glazers. Culture comes from the top. Comes from the top. I'm literally saying a toxic culture comes from the top of an organisation. It very rarely starts at the bottom. It comes from the top. And therefore you have to ask the question of the structures and the culture within the club, behind the scenes, in the dressing room, and then in the boardroom. Something is going. It's the same with Everton. To a certain extent, Newcastle until the new ownership took over under Mike Ashley. Certain clubs seem to have a really bad culture issue, and whether it's poor ownership or whatever the issue may be, certain clubs do, in my opinion, have issues. And Man United is a prime example of a really, really poor corporate and playing culture. Am I a fan of the top 14 in France? I think it's teams aren't consistent enough in the top 14. Home form is dominant, away form isn't great. But if you're a rugby player, do you want to get a paycheck? You are going to go there. It's the top paying league in the world. This is where the Southern Hemisphere just can't keep up with the money and the best players in the playing in France. And New Zealand and Australia, and to a certain extent South Africa, are losing talent to the French league at an alarming rate. And because of their selection policies, especially in Australia and New Zealand, where it's, unless it's exceptional circumstances, like a Dan Carter, for example, you can't represent your country. Same with England, they are losing talent, which ultimately I think means the All Blacks are putting out a weaker side than they actually could. And I mean that seriously. The All Blacks just cannot, New Zealand and Australia cannot afford to keep their best players because their best players want to get paid. And they end up playing overseas. Just imagine how good the Wallabies and the All Blacks could be. That's terrifying. The South Africans are just world class, but imagine how good, Australia and New Zealand could be. If they could keep all their talent that they produce. Just imagine how different world rugby would be if they could afford to keep their talent. That's where professionalism hasn't fully worked. I was just going on about Rashford leaving Man United Golden Boy. Yeah, I think he does it. I think he's lost faith in the system and the culture and the structures. Lingard had a resurgence at West Ham. I'm surprised West Ham didn't sign him full time at the end of last season. There's definitely players looking to get out, promising good players. And Rashford has been a success story of the United Academy in recent years. And, there's been a lot of talk about him looking to leave in the summer and go elsewhere, be it in Europe or in England. It's one of them. He's been exceptionally loyal to the club. Ever since he debuted, he's been exceptionally loyal to the club. And for him to be linked to a move away is troubling. If Rashford does leave, that is a big blow to Man United, just for their image. I don't know what else to say on that, really. But with the fallout from the Mason Greenwood saga, which I think is still ongoing, it's obviously just gone quiet while the police are conducting their inquiries. For Marcus Rashford to leave does say that it was a massive culture problem. In recent games in the FA Cup that I've watched, he looked disinterested. The game against Villa, for example, he really just did not look happy. with what was going on the field. He just did not look at the races. They were lucky to win that game. If Villa wins that game, no, I think that's different. To be fair, New Zealand and South Africa players going into a better league help. No, it doesn't, because their best talent is not playing domestically. Although South Africa have different selection policies now, but New Zealand, some of their best talent is not playing in New Zealand, and their selection policy is you've got to be based in New Zealand to play. And the collapse of the old Super Rugby format, and now it's the Australian Pacific New Zealand Super Rugby, where South Africa is no longer part of it. I think there is money issues within the sport in the Southern Hemisphere. Massive financial problems. Yeah, it was these Southern Hemisphere nations that were driving for professionalism back in the early 90s. And while between Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa won the majority of the World Cups, apart from England winning one, they drove for this professionalism, yet they can't afford to pay all their players, and there's money issues within the sport. Let that sink in. Just let that sink in. Their unions were the driving force behind the drive for professionalism, yet their domestic games have money problems. And while the All Blacks, the Springboks, and the Wallabies have been the most successful international sides at World Cup level, Australia haven't won since 1999, and it's just been a toss-up between the South Africans and the All Blacks, alternating World Cups in recent years. 2007 till now, it's been South Africa and New Zealand, but the issue is finances. Premier League dominating Champions League and Europa League. Do you think overall it's good or bad? Spain had its period. Germany's had its periods in European football historically. England, France has had a couple of European champions at the Champions League with Marseille, or the old Cup Winners' Cup and the old UEFA Cup Europa League in its history. But each nation goes through its period of we're the dominant, we're winning this title for a period. It shows how competitive our league is. At the same time, in the 2010s, Spanish clubs dominating, was that good or bad? I'm not a fan of tiki-taka football. It's had its day. There's ways to work around it and defeat the tiki-taka Barcelona style, which has been Spain's undoing in recent tournaments. Is they play without a centre forward, or they play centre forwards out of position, even though there's some really good centre forwards playing who are eligible for the Spanish team. Man City playing without a centre forward. Okay, they're still top of the league, but they're not as dominant as they were when they had Aguero. And there are ways to mitigate Man City, but Man United last weekend, didn't. They stopped playing. Is it good or bad? It shows how good the league is. But how many of those players playing at those clubs are English? How many English players are taking the field, or British players are taking the field for these clubs? That's the question that should be asked, because in Germany, in Italy, in Spain, to a certain extent in France, a higher percentage of domestic players are playing. That's the question you should be asking, is with these English clubs doing so well in Europe, how many of those players on the field are English? Or British, because a lot of the good Scottish and Irish and Welsh players do end up going into the English club league system. But how many of British players are playing for these British clubs in Europe? And Rangers are doing quite well as well. That's a question that needs to be asked. It's not that the English and English clubs and Rangers are doing quite well in Europe this season. Is how many domestically based players who are eligible to represent the home nations are playing in those games. That's the question that should be asked, rather than the clubs are doing well. It's okay, how many percentage-wise of players on a match night are English, Scottish, Welsh, and Irish? That's the debating point. It's not whether the teams are doing well, it's how many domestic players are playing. I would rather see more teams in various leagues doing well, rather than saying, yeah, you can argue that the Champions League changed the Champions League format since 1997, and the UEFA Europa League, which was the UEFA Cup, and the scrapping of the Cup Winners' Cup hasn't necessarily benefited, everyone. Blackburn make playoffs a few weeks ago. Social started with Fulham top of the Yes. I remember that. In the old Division 1, back in the day. Our form has slipped. Injuries have kicked in. We're still in the playoff places. I would rather we went through a wobble now and then peaked during the playoff, and promotion run towards the end of the season. I'd rather we go through a little wobble now and then pick the form up and then go into the playoffs or a final push for automatic promotion towards the end of the season. We have weeks to do that. We have games to do that. But yeah, we are having a bit of a wobble, and that's concerning if form dip continues going into the playoffs or automatic promotion. That is a concern. We should have beaten Bristol City. We didn't. So that for me is a worry. At the same time, we are ahead of where we were last year, so we have overperformed this season. We are doing better than last year, and therefore the year before. So in that regard, I'm happy. Look, if we make playoffs, I think that's a good season. From where we were in the depths of League One at one point, the proper League One, the old Division Two, or technically the old Division Three, if we're going by pre-1992 standards, we are in a better position now than where we were when Tony Mowbray took over. There's no doubt on that. We're playing better than last season in results and in points. We're in a better league position, so I'm happy with that. If we got promoted to the Premier League at the end of the season, I don't think we stay up. And is that beneficial for some of these players? No. We've had injury problems. Squad depth has been tested. The form has dipped. I don't see Fulham staying up in the Premier League after next season. I see them going straight back down. That's the problem. Brentford have been, I think, a success story in their first season in the Premier League. Reminds me of Ipswich a little bit. But Ipswich had a really good first season in the Premier League, finishing fifth, and then they got relegated the second season. Bradford City had a very good first season in the Premier League, and then got relegated the next season. So Huddersfield had a good first season in the Premier League, got relegated the next season. So be careful what you wish for. Again, it's to do with the ownership as well. The debt the club has is ridiculous. So yes, you do want to have that Premier League payday. At the same time, to be competitive in the Premier League, we'd have to spend so much money on signings that it would be disastrous if we got relegated after one season. I think new ownership is required, and better ownership is required to make it back to the Premier League days. I'm a realist fan. I'm a realistic fan. When I go on the fan group pages and I see fans bagging the team and how we're better than we were last season. We're at the top end of the table. We're not mid-table, middling. We're not in a relegation fight. We've finally got managerial stability. We're finally developing good players again. We have a decent squad. A bit of improvement in the summer. We're a better team. We can learn a lot from. I think we can learn a lot from this season to be better next season. Absolutely. Let's not do a Barnsley and a Derby and end up at the wrong end of the table. That's the important thing. If we do, we're in a playoff spot. It's luck of the draw when it comes to playoffs. Our form does need to improve a little bit, though. Players have to play an international 35 caps and Super Rugby, then they can go to France or Great Britain. There is that kind of, you have to play. If you haven't hit this, you can't go overseas at this point. They've brought that rule in, but at the same time, there's still 35 caps is nothing in international rugby these days. When you've got players who are reaching 100 plus caps or 50 plus caps, they are still losing talent to get money because they can't afford to keep them because they want those big contracts. Back in the day, Aberdeen, Mechelen, I have no idea who they are. Feyenoord, Gothenburg, Borussia Mönchengladbach. Back in the 70s, I did a history video on them. Check out my history video on Borussia Mönchengladbach. They were the dominant German side in the 70s. They won a lot of trophies in the 70s. Hell of a lot of trophies. Partizan, Bruges, Anderlecht, got a great history. St Etienne, they had a good side back in the 90s. Auxerre had a good side back in the 90s and the early 2000s. And yes, money has, I think, not been for the better. Hamburg, Nottingham Forest, obviously, there you go. They defeated Malmo in their first European Cup final and Hamburg in their second with Kevin Keegan in the Hamburg side. I think Malmo could have won what is now the Champions League. There you go. Think of that. And Tottenham think they want to join the European Super League. Forest, 2 more trophies than they have in Europe. KV Mechelen. Oh, wow. We are doing some history. And I'm not even sure if they still exist anymore. Mechelen. Um, do I think Australia and New Zealand will scrap? They have to. They have to. It's a global sport. If rugby union and to a certain extent rugby league want to be taken seriously as global sports, they would have to, um, you know, uh, do what football does and just be it's a global sport. The best players can play wherever they want as long as they are eligible to still play or make themselves available to play internationally. It's simple. That's my opinion. Um, we're talking about clubs not from the big league. Oh no, well, Feyenoord, the Dutch league, Ajax and Feyenoord, and have got a great history in Europe. Um, the Swedish league back in the 70s was a very good league. Saint Etienne, the French league, has had some great historical clubs. PSG have ruined that, but Monaco made a Champions League final. Marseille have won the Champions League in 1992. Um, so the Belgian league used to be the Belgian national side back in the 80s and 90s was an outstanding team. And Anderlecht and Bruges and Charleroi in the A, they have some great club history. The problem is the 90s, what I call the 90s era. So the modern era now with the Sky TV and the TV money. Yeah, it's not the same. Um, and the history of football has been bastardized by the money. And so when I do my club history videos, I will choose random clubs that I know have won silverware in the past, um, and can't compete at the European level now because the way that it's gone since 1992 has not been for the benefit of all. It's been for the benefit of about 12 to about 15 clubs. So this European Super League argument, um, they've made a lot of money since 1992 and have wasted a lot of money as well as the European Super League finances proved. These clubs all were basically broke. So while they've made massive revenues, they've made massive losses, and COVID has exposed them for their poor financial management over the last 30 years. That's where the European Super League idea came from. Is they had run out of money. Before COVID, there was talk about unifying the Dutch and Belgian leagues to compete with the Premier. Uh, to a certain extent, I think the French community, the French speaking community, like Liège, Charleroi, um, there's a there would be resistance, divisive resistance in Belgium, which would be a problem. Um, that's the issue. The Flemish speakers would be more than happy to have Anderlecht and some of the other big uh, Belgian clubs that are from the north of Belgium playing in the Dutch league, but the French clubs like Liège and Charleroi, uh, Standard Liège, that would be a big no-no, and be very divisive on Belgian society, a society that's already very divided between the Walloon and the Flemish um, um, groups. The Walloon are ethnically aligned with the French a little bit, and their French Walloon dialect is similar to the Pas de Calais kind of dialect. That's the Ardennes region, and the Flemish, slightly different to Dutch, but again, they're more ethnically and linguistically aligned to the Dutch kind of style of things. But at the same time, there's also a fair bit of corruption in Belgian football as well that has come to light in recent years. So and there's issues with stadium infrastructure as well that the Dutch don't have. The Dutch don't have that problem. And Feyenoord and Eindhoven and Ajax still regularly qualify for the Champions League and at least do decently in the group stages. And whereas the Belgian clubs really struggle in Europe lately, and there is issues with infrastructure, corruption, match fixing scandals. Um, there is that. Money on PSG, I don't bet, but PSG, no, you can buy all you want, all the players you want. It's a team full of individuals rather than individuals who make up a team. There's not enough teamwork there. There's too much ego. Neymar, Mbappe, Messi, stupid money for a player who's basically on his last legs, a player who missed half the games he's eligible to play, and a guy who wants nearly $1 million a week, not a year, a week. Yeah, yeah, no thanks, no thanks. None of them can win a World Cup apart from Mbappe, but Mbappe was hopeless at the Euros, did nothing. Messi won Copa America, one international title in all those years. Can't do anything at the World Cup. Too much of an individualistic player, not enough of a team player. NRL is a scrap state of origin. Origin NRL games period is terrible. It's had massive bumper ratings and great attendances. I love state of origin. I think they should bring back city country origin, and I think that was a mistake under the Greenberg era of um, of getting rid of city country origin. I think that was a massive blow because it just was. I think that was a mistake. I love state of origin. I think yes, the mid-season origin period, fans are divided on it. I wouldn't scrap state of origin. Obviously, in 2020 they had it at the end of the season, and that benefited Queensland in a certain extent because none of the Queensland teams made finals football, so a lot of their better players were fresher and weren't so bashed up. But I wouldn't scrap state of origin. There's a debate of possibly having it in the pre-season or at the end of the season, or having it, yeah, sort of when the World Cup would be on in the middle of that cycle. Um, there's various debates over the format. I wouldn't. I wouldn't scrap it. I think there is debate about when they schedule it in the season or before the season or after the season. I personally would have it before the season. Um, like they have the Indigenous versus Maori All Stars. That's classed as a rep game. I would possibly have the rep games in the off season. But again, the players union would have to agree on that, and New South Wales and Queensland Rugby League would have to agree on that. And you could do it in the World Cup slot in between World Cups at that time of year, and when the World Cup's on, you don't have state of origin. It's a theory, it's an idea. I wouldn't scrap it though, but there are concerns that certain fans aren't overly happy with the origin period, but that's been the case since 1980. You're never going to appease everyone. And I know it's an unpopular opinion of yours, but it's a debating point. There has been a debate: move it to the end of the season, have it before the season, have it in the period when the World Cup would technically be. Um, in the years the World Cup isn't on, there is that debate, but it is possibly one of the biggest sports events globally now. The overseas audience has skyrocketed, especially with the COVID pandemic and the NRL being the first league with an international imprint to start up again, and having Origin when they did, and the crowds are really good when they take it to non-traditional locations. They played Origin games in the US before, um, so. But the debate's been had since 1980 about when do they schedule Origin matches. It's not going to change. They're contracted in, for that point of the year. It was only the 2020 they did it at the end of the season for the one-off. Last season they had all three games in Queensland, which was a one-off. So there is that debate, but it is what it is. Apparently, all the clubs from Belgium agreed to join the Eredivisie. It was the Dutch clubs that were against, apart from PSV and Ajax. That is interesting. I think it's the integrity of the competition, and then you've got to merge the lower leagues as well. If you're going to combine the top leagues, you've got to merge the lower leagues. And again, there's a lack of money in the Belgian lower divisions, and it's transport costs, and it's a whole host of other logistical issues. They both use the euro, so there's not a currency issue there, but it's what the infrastructure in the Belgian second tier is crap. The Dutch second tier is half decent. It's then making it competitive as possible. You would have to restructure the whole league structure, where you would have to cherry pick. Okay, a dual kind of merging the whole. Then you would have to merge the FAs as well, and then you would have to come up with. It's never been done before in football, having two countries play in the same league, where every club is part of the same league structure. Whereas with countries like Liechtenstein, their best teams play in the Swiss league, but they have their own domestic league. It's like the Welsh clubs playing in the English league system. The best clubs, there's only 4 or 5 of them playing the English league system. but they have their own domestic league system. There's Berwick Rangers playing the Scottish league system just for geographical reasons, because the nearest club would be Newcastle, and they're just not on the same level. Um, it hasn't. Even San Marino has its own domestic league. Even Malta have their own domestic league. So there is. It's never been done before. Like completely, you would have to have both FAs as well, and they would have to start merging. The Belgian and Dutch FAs would have to merge together, and again that becomes a bit political. And then the Walloon Flemish divide in Belgium would spark off if the Flemish side suddenly got preferential treatment in the league structure. That it does get very fiery over there on a political and social level. So while the Belgian clubs per se may be in favour of it, I can understand that the Dutch clubs voting against, and it's to do with how the lower leagues would be structured, because the Belgian second tier below is terrible. It's shocking, and the amount of Belgian clubs that have had to reform and merge, it is generally a mess in Belgian football. I enjoy Belgian beer, but that's nothing. The Belgian chocolate's quite nice, and the history of the Ardennes region is amazing. So the history of the country is amazing. The national side is one of the best in the world, but can't get over the line, and it was like that in the 80s as well. I don't know what else to say. Belgium is an interesting country. The history behind Belgium and what the nations that went before, and the history. The northern half of Belgium should be part of Holland, and the southern half of Belgium should be part of France. Just how it should be. But for political reasons in the 1830s, it ended up basically being a country that was made out of treaty, basically. I should redo a history of Belgium on the other channel. But it's a very strange country with two official languages. The southern half is completely different to the northern half. It really is a country of divides. The southern half is in the Ardennes region. It's very mountainous. There's a few. Tintin, yeah, that's a Belgian comic book. Yes. Tintin is the French way of saying it. Captain Haddock, blustering barnacles. I'm a big fan. I've got all the Tintin comics. I'm a big fan of Tintin. As a kid, it was one of my favourite comics growing up. The Adventures of Tintin, and it's set in the 1930s, so in the Depression period as well, which is really interesting. Yeah, well, health wise, it's been a bit up and down. Last year was brutal health wise, absolutely brutal. My mental health side of things, I've had a lot of ups and downs over the last 2.5 years. It is what it is. But it is what it is. There you go. The big concern, but no, appreciate you popping in. It's nice to see another Blackburn fan outside of Blackburn. We're not many, but we are around. We do get around, but there's not many of us. I think the main concern with Belgian teams getting into their top tier being replaced Anderlecht, Antwerp, Genk, Liège. Yeah, Claude Van Damme, Jean-Claude Van Damme, the muscles from Brussels, even though he's not actually from Brussels. Yeah, there are some really interesting things about Belgian history. I'll ask you a history of the Kingdom of Belgium. Um, um, so yeah, but there was a proposal during the COVID pandemic. Um, it's there was that proposal put forward, but it's never been done before. And the logistics behind it, and then getting everyone on board. I don't know what the fans would feel about it. Quite frankly, because they're the ones who could be going to games, and then you've got to put in the travel cost. And with rising prices, I think that would be ridiculous, especially for a second. Let's say a second division. I don't know Belgian second division size, but hypothetically, let's think of a. I think it's Brussels FC is the second team after Anderlecht in the Belgian capital. I think they are playing currently in the second division. Just imagine the travel costs, because you've got to keep the ticket prices fair, and then you've got to, let's say they've got to play a game against Sparta Rotterdam, for example. It's not too bad on the train, but it's a fair drive. And then you've got to try and combine two leagues, two second tiers? How do you do promotion relegation? Um, Getting the infrastructure in place, the finances, because the Belgian football is financially a mess, and Dutch football is a lot healthier. That's the difference. The Dutch league is the Dutch structures. The clubs are well supported. And while Ajax, Feyenoord, and PSV are the big clubs, and you've got Utrecht and AZ Alkmaar in there now, and there's some other clubs. They are much better run. Crowd numbers are good at stadiums. The quality level is better. Belgian clubs, they could all be relegated within the first season or two. And then how do you work out the promotion relegation side of it when you're combining two league structures together? You would have to get both FAs to be on board. You would have to get all the fans would have to have a say. Club owners would have to have a say. A lot of stakeholders there, sponsors would have to get involved. And while there's been a lot of cooperation between Holland and Belgium over the last since 1945 in regards to a lot of things socially and politically and economically, and Luxembourg as well, because they're part of the Benelux kind of countries. They're all one country at one point. Hello, Plague Doctor. Hello, Rob. My friend Rob from up the road. He literally was around the corner. He's probably got his daughters today. How you doing, Rob? How you doing, Plague Doctor? You still got COVID? He's a full fan, so ignore him. The issues of the structures, you would have to combine the Belgian FA with the Dutch FA. It would have to happen. The companies that are in charge of the Belgian league and the Dutch league would have to merge two companies together. You would have to think about the fact that the Dutch side would have to basically financially prop up the Belgian side, apart from a handful of clubs. There is money issues in Belgian football. There is corruption issues in Belgian football. The more successful Dutch clubs would be the ones propping up the Belgian side of things. Then you have to sort out a TV deal and renegotiate TV deals, not only for your domestic markets in two countries, but also overseas. And that becomes problematic when you've already got contracts in place. You would have to completely renegotiate contracts, which is a headache, especially with look what's happened with the French TV deal. The French league has collapsed during COVID. So there is that, side aspect to it. Is completely renegotiating the media rights deals, the sponsorships, who's going to be the title sponsor of the league, whole host of things. The size of the league, would it be like a 22 team league, a 24 team league, an 18 team league? How would the second tier work? How would the third tier work? Would you then go to regional, Belgium and Holland for like the third tier? So the top team is the only team that gets promoted. The Dutch league is better, but the Belgian league has more diverse Belgian clubs successful. To a certain extent, you have to look at the history of it. You would have to actually go in the history books and look at how the success is spread around. The difference being, I think, Dutch sides have actually won what is now the Champions League, whereas Belgian sides have, I think, won what is now the Europa League Cup, Winners' Cup. That's the difference. That's the difference. If you look at it, is that yes, on the European success-wise, the Dutch have been more successful. The Dutch have had more successful teams internationally. Belgium's never been to a World Cup final. Holland have been to 3. The Dutch have won Euros. Belgium never won anything internationally. I think that it's subjective which league's better or which league's got the better history. But on the actual economics, much like when you've got leagues with salary caps like the NHL, the NFL, the NRL revenue sharing, how would the TV deal work? How would you split the TV money from the Belgian networks and the Dutch networks? Because you've got to have a network that's bilingual in Belgium. You would have to have the option of bilingual commentary. You would have to have, so that's the pain in the arse. You would have to have you would have to combine 2 separate TV deals basically for that to work. There's a lot of economic issues that are barriers. You would have to definitely have a joint FA, a joint league kind of governance side of things, where do the Belgian FA and the Dutch FA stay separate? Do they combine? How much say would they have over the running of the league? What would be the parent company? What would the league be called? LeBron will retire soon. Not an NBA fan. People complain he is negative force for the league, low rating. Um, Again, I'm not an NBA fan. Much like Major League Baseball. But the difference between Major League Baseball and the NBA is I can name you NBA players, past and present, whereas with Major League Baseball, have fun with that. And I discussed that in yesterday's video in regards to the lockout ending and will Labour peace last. Um, I was going to do a live stream after that, but then I started to uh, watch some rugby league documentaries, so I didn't. And I ordered pizza, which I'm now regretting because it's repeating on me and my stomach's a bit dodgy. But yeah, LeBron James, massive contract. He will retire at some point. I don't, I'm not an NBA fan. I've got friends who are basketball fans, and fair play to them. I'm not saying it's a bad sport. It's just a sport I can't get into. I've discussed that before on the channel. Um, it's a difficult one. No ratings. I think if you've got like uh, ratings dive in a sport, you have to look at more than just one player or one organisation. Um, And this is what Major League Baseball is finding out: is the fan base, young fans, sport fans aren't interested in baseball in the numbers they were 20 years ago, and there's a whole host of reasons for that. If I was to go and you know, my brother, for example, he's got LA Kings gear. He's not a hockey. Well, he's been to a few games with me, but he's not an ice hockey fan per se. But I've been to games. My brother's not really a sports fan. It's just not his cup of tea. He's 19 years old and he's not interested in sport. He earns more money than me as well, so he's got more disposable income than me. But he's not interested in sport, really. It's not. He's more interested in video games. And but if I was to go to sort of a secondary school and do a presentation on, what sports, and show secondary school kids, rugby league, rugby union, the North American major leagues, cricket, whatever sport, I bet you a lot of them don't choose basketball or choose. It's a difficult one because obviously in the UK we've got association football, rugby union, rugby league, cricket. They're the major sports. Ice hockey's got a good following now and it's growing. So you've got established sports, and basketball just doesn't compete. Baseball doesn't compete. So while there's a trend in certain inner city areas with certain socioeconomic groups who will gravitate to the Afro Caribbean community is obsessed with basketball. And they gravitate because they see Afro Caribbeans and African Americans playing a sport. That's what they're going to gravitate to. It's the same with the Asian community with cricket. And people have asked me, well, why there aren't more Asian players? Because they're not interested. The kids are interested in cricket. They're obsessed with cricket because it's part of their community's culture. How they're brought up. Their dads loved it. Their granddads loved it. They played it back in India and Pakistan and Bangladesh before they came over as first and second generation immigrants. And so if I was to go to a British kid and go, what sport do you like? Say you're not allowed to follow football. Take that off the table. Football's, you're not allowed to follow football. What other sports would you like? And you've got to show them these sports. They're probably going to choose the contact sports like rugby league, rugby union, ice hockey because they're exciting. There's something happening. It's action all the time. There's never a dull moment because there are big hits going in, the pace of the game. There's rugby league and ice hockey, very few stoppages. Rugby union started to lose a few fans because it's two stop start, and that's a global thing. But if I was yeah, it's NFL films. They're all good documentary series. They're all well produced. Doesn't matter what era, coaches, the players, lots of history. Yeah, when you look at sports documentaries and off the field kind of stuff, and when they interview ex players and coaches and fans and executives and media personalities, they are good. The issue with the NFL is it is a very stop start kind of style of play. There's a lot of breaks in play. It's more of a thinking man's game when it comes to tactics. If we're discussing sports that have had ratings dives or issues attracting new fans, you could argue to a certain extent the NBA has issues, but Major League Baseball is by far the the Big Four is having a lot of problems. And while it may have solved the labour issues with the new CBA, I can see the players going on strike before the CBA expires. I can see there being further unrest because there wasn't universal agreement from the Players Association in agreeing to this CBA. There was still a lot of reservations from those at the executive committee level at the Players Association going, hang on a second, you won't be given a bad deal here. And at some point down the line, we're going to have further labour unrest in Major League Baseball. The problem hasn't been solved just by this. And then you look at the younger fans, you know, not being interested in the way the league markets itself to not only its domestic audience but the wider global audience. The way the London series went down with Major League Baseball, mixed reviews. You know, the trying to grow the brand with advertising and reaching out to new fans. And Major League Baseball has an image problem. It's the same with cricket to a certain extent, although T20 and one day internationals and then the shorter formats are definitely a good thing, in my opinion, for getting new fans into the game. The structural issues with cricket and the cultural issues with cricket from within dressing rooms and the negative headlines that come out and the poor TV deal as well, in my opinion, are definitely harmed that sport. Um, so there are ways to improve your branding and sell your product. And we are starting seeing pushback against subscription only models. There's definitely pushback, or the price of the subscription only. My NRL.com subscription is 130 quid a year. It is going to go up when I renew my subscription in a couple of months. But for £12.50 a month, as it works out, if I was to break it down monthly, that's not bad. That's not bad to get every single game of not only the men's competition, women's competition, state of origin, and the related TV programs and documentaries that go with that package. It's a hell of a lot cheaper than Sky, and I get a lot more. I get a lot more out of it. So that price is good. I could get the same for the AFL one as well through the Fox Sports and AFL.com, and I'm tempted. I am tempted. But I don't have the time to watch both the AFL and the NRL. I just do not have the time to commit to both whilst I have a full-time job. If I was doing this full-time, then yes, I could happily watch a whole season of AFL, a whole season of NRL, and all the related, programming that goes with it. At the moment, do not have the time. But it's the way they market themselves. The Major League Baseball was, I think, the last major league in North America to resume play. There was issues with their resumption of play talks. There was a threat of a player strike then. They didn't. Both sides allowed the CBA to lapse, even though there was clearly issues there where they could negotiate and do what they've done now earlier. As soon as the season ended, they should start negotiations. They didn't. And they've undone a lot of labour stability since 1995. And I can see with what they've put together as the package is not good enough. NFL films, yeah, we've done that. LeBron will retire soon, not an NBA fan. People complain he's a negative force for the league. You've got NBA fans who are big fans of LeBron James, and you've got those who are not so big fans of him. But you look at his stats and how he can still play at the top level. There you go. He is one of the greatest of all time. End of discussion. He's one of the greatest of all time. At the same time, he's a polarizing figure. I understand that. ESPN 30 for 30. There are some interesting stories. Yeah, I'm not a fan of ESPN. Partly because it's owned by Disney, and I'm not a massive fan of how ESPN deals with some of its sports dealings, and it's not the best network. It really isn't. ESPN is not the best sports network out there. But each their own. I've watched a lot of documentaries and interview series where sports interviews and stuff, and it's. I do like my sports documentaries, and you know, I'll happily, happily sit and watch sport documentaries all day if I could in the off seasons of various leagues that I follow. I have done in the past. But the best ones, I think, the Ben Cousins. There's two documentaries on Ben Cousins, a former AFL player, and this is where the player welfare thing that we were discussing earlier comes into play. Major drug problems, and it was towards the end of his career that, well, the league were trying to ban him for a long time, but it was towards the end of his career when things were clearly going wrong with him. He was making headlines even over here for some of his antics. Um, and Ben Cousins' story. I mean, it came out in 2010. He made his comeback with Richmond. He'd been the West Coast Eagles um, in Perth the majority of his career, and he won championships and was a really brilliant player. And the league basically put him on a delisted him, deregistered him, and unfortunately, I think the AFL was in denial about the drug culture within their sport and their league. Absolutely, in my opinion, the AFL was definitely um, the AFL as a league is in denial about the drug use their within their playing group. I have no doubt on that. The NRL, I think, is fully aware of the issues that they're facing with alcohol and drug use within their playing group as well. But for some reason, the NRL players, they're regularly in the media, whereas the AFL players seem to get away with it a little bit more. Bearing in mind the majority of the Australian media is based in Sydney and Brisbane and Melbourne, but they're more focused in the Sydney market. The national media is based out of Sydney, and the NRL's heartland is Sydney, whereas Melbourne, which is the AFL's heartland, while there's a fair media presence in Melbourne, um, because the NRL is always having negative headlines in the off season, the AFL players seem to go under the radar a fair bit. How long that continues is another thing. ESPN is liberal garbage. It's woke now. It's a shame. ESPN's always been liberal garbage. ESPN's been garbage for a long time. It's I'm not a massive fan of ESPN. Not a massive fan of ESPN. Never have been. Um, Before BT Sport came on, we did have ESPN, and then the ESPN Europe got broken up, and various other broadcasters, took on ESPN broadcasts. ESPN hasn't been great for a very, very long time. I would say since the early 90s. West Coast Eagles being a perfect spiral. Yeah, Ben Cousins. That is definitely a story of how the sport failed him. But he also made his own errors as an adult. But when he was a younger player coming through, there was already, he'd already started his drug use at the age of like 16, 17 when he was still at school. He was still at, schoolboy age, playing in schoolboy competitions. He was already a drug user and a heavy drinker back when he was like 16, 17. The issues with Ben Cousins is people knew, not just him, but there was a fair minority of players, not just at the West Coast Eagles, but within the league that clearly had an issue with recreational drugs, especially crystal meth, cocaine, ecstasy, and it's not just an AFL; it's an NRL problem as well. And this is an issue that Australian sports leagues are confronting on a daily basis. I mean, Jared Hayne's been involved in yet another incident with overnight in Parramatta. Jared Haynes, he's can't stay out of trouble. The Jack DeBellin incident. The Russell Packer, he broke a bloody guy's head, he basically had brain damage and smashed his skull up and went to prison. So the NRL has had constant off-field dramas. Every off-season, someone has been something stupid. I mean, it's drug or alcohol related, stupid, and they get in trouble. Allegations are made. Some of them get arrested. the AFL has this issue as well, but it is not as well reported, or they get away with it. But it is there, and I think the Ben Cousins situation is one of them that um, definitely raises the issue of, well, they knew he was doing it. The league was trying to ban him. He never failed a drugs test while he was playing, um, and he was the best player in the league at the time. This is the thing; it wasn't as if he was just a player who had a lot of potential. He threw it away. He was the best player. Yeah, Wendell Sailor's son is in court right now. Very similar to the Jack DeBellin situation, which says to me that there's a culture issue at the Dragons. It was more than just barbecue game. I think there is definitely a culture issue at the Dragons that goes back years, um, years and years at the Dragons. Barbecue gate was small fry compared to some of the issues at St George Illawarra Dragons. And with what's happened with Jared Hayne and Jack DeBellin, Hayne found guilty, facing a third trial. Jack DeBellin had three trials as well. Um, it does say to me the whole Ben Barber situation, who got deregistered for life, even though he was not even charged with any offences. Um, there is definitely, and Jared Haynes had allegations when he was playing for the 49ers over in the NFL as well. He had some legal troubles over there of a similar nature. There is definitely a massive, massive culture issue here at play. Um, and then, we get onto the debate about, okay, good player welfare, but then we're getting to the debate of the it's a privilege, not a right to be an athlete. No one has a right to be a professional athlete. It's a privilege to be in that position, to be earning big money um, playing sport. And it's like Mason Greenwood at Man United. There is definitely an issue within professional team sports, at least, of a sense of entitlement. That they're not being. I don't think they're given the right guidance when they're younger players, which leads to these bad behaviours manifesting themselves when they throughout their careers. Um, and I go back to the Shane Warne interview we gave, I think about 2018, when he said he wasn't prepared for the media spotlight and the pressure that came with that, and then every incident in his private life, which the breakdown of his marriage, his relationship with Liz Hurley, all that, it's irrelevant. He's a parent. He's got kids. The fact his relationship with his wife broke down is irrelevant. That's the mother of his children. This is a guy who's a parent as well as an athlete. And his post-playing career, he was a brilliant commentator, a brilliant coach, a brilliant ambassador for the sport. During his career, yeah, he made some mistakes. His drugs ban, I think, is a prime example of being under the spotlight. His weight was brought up a lot. He was a bit on the chubby side, that kind of thing, and he was concerned about his weight. And I think that's dogged him. I think throughout his life was he was very concerned about his physique. And in the last couple of years, he was seen as being having a six pack and being pretty ripped. Um, and he made reference that he wasn't prepared for the media spotlight. He wasn't prepared for every test match he was playing. There was 20, 30 cameras, journalists just wanting to talk to him, not the rest of the team, just to him. And he was the youngest guy in the team. He didn't feel like he was protected enough and prepared enough to deal with that. And that followed him throughout his career. Um, and there definitely needs to be a bit more, attention and care given to some of these young players, and a bit more guidance. And I think their teams, their sports could do more. They've got enough money to do more to, you know, educate them, give them some guidance. A lot of them do come, especially in certain like rugby league and football. They come from very poor backgrounds, working class backgrounds. They may not have a father figure or a mother figure. They might come from a single person, a single parent household. More likely a mother than a father, but they may have not had the best upbringing. Um, you know, they weren't around money when growing up. And to suddenly get all this money, um, very very young is a lot of temptations out there. I'm not making excuses for them. I'm stating the facts. Best sports network. I'm undecided on the best sports network. I like Premier Sports because it's more of a budget sports channel, but you don't pay too much for it. Free Sports. Um, I'm, I'm undecided on the best sports network when it comes to sport per se. I like TSN for the Canadian sports network. I think that's one of the better overseas sports networks. Is TSN better than Sportsnet? Rogers. Um, in the Canadian market, you've got NBC, CBS Sports, obviously ESPN, Fox Sports has been running a Braille Sports now, Bailey Sports. So the Fox Sports in the US has just changed name. I'm over. There are some sports networks like ESPN and BT Sport that are crap, in my opinion. But I don't have an overall opinion on the best sports network really. I don't mind Fox Sports Australia because they actually do have some. They have two of my favourite leagues, which I can just get a good subscription for a decent amount of money, and not pay through the nose for it. It is what it is, though, isn't it? All I've got to do is renew my subscription in May, and I'm happy with the NRL. And I probably will get the AFL next year. It's just a money thing. I might get it later this season, but it's a money thing. Um, in response to the Wendell Sailor's son and that situation, it's troubling. But it's very, very similar to Jack DeBellin and Jared Hayne. Very, very similar. And it's another uh, similar incident to the other two happening all very close together since 2018. Very, very, very troubling. But again, with Wendell Sailor's son, much like Mason Greenwood, there were concerns about his behaviour off the field, his character, his attitude, his treatment of others, and there's a reason why he didn't make it as an NRL player, or even as a reserve player, or even come over to England to play in the Super League. There's a reason why he didn't make it. It's not because of lack of talent. He was an exceptionally talented individual, but there was definitely some personality issues there, and there was definitely some red flags coming up. And he's ended up in this situation. Now, whether he's found guilty or not, that's another thing, but I don't think he plays rugby league professionally ever again. But it is worth talking about, and that's the problem. It's rugby league making the headlines for the wrong reasons again, and it's player misbehaviour off the field, be it a current or ex-player, high profile or the son of a high profile player. It's irrelevant. It's still negative headlines, legal troubles, similar legal troubles that have gone before recently. It's like the sport has learned nothing. And I was listening to a podcast earlier about the Todd Greenberg era of the NRL, Fergo and the Freak, and I know it's 2 years old, that episode that I was listening to, but what did Todd Greenberg was not the commercial side of the sport. It was the public image of the sport. That's what did Todd Greenberg. It was the handling of player misbehaviour, the handling of club executive misbehaviour. The no fault, no stand down policy was an ill thought out policy, which could lead to litigation against the league. It was the communication, it was the relationship between the players, the club owners, the club directors, and the NRL board. And while he was a very capable businessman, made the league a lot of money, it was more the image that the sport was projecting, and the relationships between the stakeholders and the media. And there were issues within the Todd Greenberg administration. We did find out during COVID that when the players wanted to access their retirement fund to cover the shortfall in their salaries, that a third of it was missing. And that does lie with the CEO. That lies with the top. And heads should have rolled for that. We did roll for that. But absolutely, I could look back at the Todd Greenberg era, the success and failures, and go, you know, is the NRL? They look at the history of the NRL CEOs and their successes and failures, and there's been a lot of failures in there. A lot of failures. You know, it's one of them. And when we have, I started this stream on a player welfare note and discussing some of the concussions and other injuries we saw over the weekend in a couple of sports. Um, and there's been rules brought in, whether for the good or bad of the game or the product, designed to encourage players to improve their contact in the contact sports, like try and mitigate head injuries and reduce the number of them and protect the players. And mixed reviews on that, and we are going to see, some pushback. I think there's going to be some discussion in the media on Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. We're going to look at the injury reports and who's out injured and for how long and what the mandatory stand down period is for concussion. I would say if it's classed as a grade 1, you've got to come off immediately and you're not allowed to return to play. I would definitely say in that regard, they shouldn't play for a mandatory period of about 6 weeks. As someone who's had 2 concussions last year in a very short space of time, I would say yes, there needs to be a mandatory stand down period. But the clubs obviously want their best players in the field, and there's that pressure to put the strongest starting team you can on the field or on the ice or on the pitch. But I think there needs to be a mandatory stand down period, depending on the grading, and then following up. In my opinion, if a player's failed an HIA within 15 minutes, he should not play for a minimum standard. I would say 6 weeks is a fair stand down period. And then go for regular neurological tests and non-contact jerseys, and then back into contact training or light training, and have a stand down period from actual game time. The clubs will just not vote for that. It just shows what player welfare means to coaches and clubs. These guys are an asset. They don't want them sitting inside but paying them to do nothing. But if I get injured at work, I get statutory sick, and then after so long, my statutory sick gets topped up by a bonus of being under a contract for a period of time. It is what it is. So I'm of the opinion that at the end of the day, there is a concern for me about player welfare and the players being rushed back. We discussed this at the beginning of the stream about litigation and the CTE lawsuit and retirement funds and fair post retirement, and we had the same discussion every time an ex-player dies young or gets in trouble legally, legal issues. Well, they've not been prepared for a life outside of sport in a lot of cases. And then we've got the issue with current players misbehaving, like Mason Greenwood and Benjamin Mendy and Wendell Sailor's son and Jack Bellin. He's still an NRL player. And we have this debate every time, and then there's not enough going. Well, we need to do more as professional sport should in education and in support post retirement and education with pathways and training pathways to find work post retirement, and it's a debate being had for many years. But anyway, I'm going to leave that there. Thank you very much for all your questions this afternoon. I really appreciate it. Really appreciate all the comments. And I'll have some more videos for you guys very, very soon. Oh, shit.